The world is dying. One by one, people are sent to other worlds to gather energy, including his parents, leaving him alone. And then, it's finally his turn, but instead of becoming a hero, he's thrown into a strange block-based world as the apostle of a forgotten goddess of abundance. His weapon, a sickle, his goddess, a ginger root, and his allies are useless baby animals. Block by block, territory by territory, he's turning the weakest role into something unstoppable, all just to reach the one place that matters most. Hunters were passing through the forest where dinosaurs roamed. A huge head of a creature appeared above the guy, reaching for him. He dodged and activated mana. The guy deftly swung his sword and attacked the creature, cutting off its limbs. He sheathed the sword, and the creature's body exploded. A voice said, "Transfer to other worlds. This is their future. Let them apply now." MC looked at this advertisement with admiration, when suddenly a hand fell on his shoulder. The old man said, What is he doing there instead of working?" MC turned around in fear and bowed, and the old man said, "That's the problem with modern youth. They are always in the clouds." Changsu asked for forgiveness. The old man told him to move and deal with the vines. MC answered, "Yes," he thought fearfully, "a nightmare." He was reprimanded on the very first day. The old man stood behind him and lamented. Back in their time, they didn't need to explain anything. They did everything right from the start. Changsu thought, no, he couldn't let himself be fired again. He swung his sword and quickly began cutting through the vines. The old man stopped talking and looked at him in surprise. MC quickly cut through the vines, and the old man silently watched what was happening. After a while, he piled the bags on the road, and the old man said, "Amazing. Such young people are rare in their time. Just let him take the bags out and go home early." MC slung the bag over his shoulder and thought sadly, transfer. Perhaps for him, this really was just a dream. The earth was destroyed. It had lost its life energy, like a game that had stopped being serviced. At that moment, an unknown absolute being suggested a solution. He needed to transfer to another world. Heroes, called transferred, who left Earth and went to other worlds, barely maintain life, returning the life force to the earth. MC looked at the sickle in his hand and asked if he could become one of them. After some time, he was walking down the street and thinking he hoped that someone would contact him about work tomorrow. He approached a building where the sign said, Transfer Reunification Center. Changsu looked around and thought, there are a lot of people here today too. He started to go inside and ask for forgiveness. It's his turn. The man sitting at the computer asked, "Is he Mr. Oh Changsu?" MC answered, "Yes." He came to find out if there is any progress in the investigation. The man carefully looked at the computer screen, where it was written that the remaining deposit for the reunification is insufficient funds. Deposit for the investigation of the transferred family, 4.5 million won, has been paid. The man said, "Mr. Changsu, they don't work here for free." He waved his hand and said that if he doesn't have enough funds, then let him come back when he fixes it. Next, MC cried out, "Information. Can't he share at least some information? At least let him say what world they are in." The man pushed him away and told him to get lost. It's his turn. Does he think he's the only one in trouble? MC went outside and started climbing the stairs. He went home and said, he's back. There were tin cans scattered on the floor that he just passed by. As a child, his father was a high-level returnee, but when the situation on Earth worsened, he was transported to another world again. In the end, he was never able to return. MC remembered how he and his father were playing football on the field. And when he turned around, his father was no longer there. His mother took his hand and said, "Son, he and his grandmother will go look for Dad and will be back soon. Let him sleep a few nights without them, okay? Let him be patient for a little while, okay?" And that's how he was left alone. Currently, Changsu was sitting on the floor and thinking. Now his memories are so foggy that he can barely remember their faces. Suddenly, he saw a bright glow in the window and looked out, wondering what's going on. He widened his eyes in surprise and saw a bright light descending to the ground. He was thrown aside by the shockwave and hit his head on the wall. At the same moment, a wall clock flew at his head, causing him to lose consciousness. After some time, MC woke up and grabbed his head. Changsu wondered what happened. He looked at the phone screen where notifications appeared. He spoke, returned. The disaster notification reported that the shockwave from A's return caused gusts of wind and flashes of light. Breaking news. Is the returned S-Class A resigning? MC screamed. Resign? He wondered what was going on there. A sound burst from the speakers of his phone. Ultimately, because he could not protect their god, he lost everyone who had transported with him. He had no choice but to return alone. Now, he had lost both his abilities and the right to travel to other worlds. The man spoke. He asks to understand that he had to resign after long discussions. He dares to ask them all. He asks to protect the land. He begs them not to lose courage. MC read the news and said, it can't be. First he failed the mission, and now he resigns? Yes, they are joking. He turned around and asked, who could be there at this hour? He heard a knock on the door and went towards it. Changsu thought there was no one to visit him. He opened the door, behind which stood a rabbit, who asked, Mr. Changsu is here? Mr. Changsu? MC looked around and thought, is this some kind of prank? The rabbit said, Mr. Changsu, Mr. Changsu, he is here. MC looked down and only then noticed the rabbit, which scared him and screamed loudly. He fell to the ground and the rabbit asked, he is Mr. Changsu, right? MC widened his eyes in surprise and thought, a rabbit, a talking rabbit. The rabbit asked Mr. Chengsu, please calm down. He has exciting news for him. He smiled and congratulated him on becoming transferred. MC asked again, what the? He thought, what kind of nonsense is this? The rabbit said, he understands he must be confused, but he really was chosen, Mr. Chengsu. He handed over the business card of the transfer support center and said, if he still has doubts, would he like to be transferred to another place? After a while, they were walking down the street, and the rabbit asked, Mr. Changsu, does he have any special skills? MC asked again. Special skills? The rabbit said, most people have at least one. Changsu replied, as he should know by now, he was not initially approved for transference. The best he can do is beautifully cut trees and flowers. He doesn't have what he calls a special skill. The rabbit widened his eyes at him in surprise, and MC thought, he didn't know? The rabbit calmed down and said, it's okay. Everything happens for a reason. The fact that he was chosen won't change, so he doesn't need to worry. Changsu thanked him and thought, he can't believe that he actually ended up in the center of the transference. He finally got his chance. The rabbit asked, will they go inside and continue their conversation? MC looked ahead and thought in surprise, what a huge door. He pulled the door handle and said, the transference is behind them. He started to pull the door towards himself and thought, what? It didn't move even in millimeter. The rabbit asked, what is he doing? As if it will open. The entrance is here. Changsu looked at the rabbit's back and asked, is he saying this is the entrance? The rabbit replied, right. What's the problem? MC looked at the small doors and screamed, how is he supposed to get through this? The rabbit replied, he personally has no problems. Changsu screamed, of course, he is a rabbit. What did he even count on? He told him to forget it, he will go. The rabbit asked, is he sure he won't regret it later? He failed all the tests and didn't even qualify for transfer. He thinks he'll get a chance like this again? The rabbit asked not to misunderstand him. He was just quoting his words, Mr. Changsu. In any case, he's very sad to be leaving. After all, he was chosen despite all the obstacles. A moment later, Changsu was already crawling along a small passage after the rabbit, wondering what he was even doing. He didn't understand anything anymore. The rabbit peeked out from around the corner and told Mr. Changsu to hurry. MC thought, he's crawling as fast as he can. He crawled to the end and came out into a room that was normal in size. He said that everything inside was normal than he expected. The rabbit asked again, what did he expect? In any case, they have a perfectly suitable world for him, Mr. Changsu. He looked at him in surprise and asked a question. Are there different worlds suitable for different people? The rabbit screamed. Of course. The world in question is called Block-Type Territory Capture. He showed a tablet that said, a great event to summon the world of Block-Type Territory Capture. MC shouted, Block-Type Territory Capture? The rabbit asked, does he already know about this? Changsu replied, no, he's never heard of it before. This isn't some weird place, is it? The rabbit turned away in irritation and thought, then why did he act like he already knew? He laughed and said, so he doesn't know. This is the hottest place right now. This world has a unique advantage, the protection of a god. MC wondered, God? He said, God? He thinks the one who came back also served God. The rabbit winked at him and said, for his information, the world has nothing to do with the recent events, so there is no need to worry. Changsu spoke, so this is God. What God are you talking about? The rabbit answered, according to the rules, the god is chosen randomly. But if he decides right now, he will give him a special opportunity to choose it himself. Cards appeared around MC, and the rabbit asked, what will he say? Has he made a decision? MC said what he will say. He thought about it. He doesn't even know which of them is good. The rabbit said, Mr. Changsu, this is a rare opportunity, and the opportunity to choose, and the chance itself. He understands that, right? MC thought about it. He is right. He doesn't know when he will get a chance like this again. So why is he hesitating like an idiot? He drew a card and said, he will take it. The rabbit looked at him carefully, and MC opened one eye and widened it in surprise. An undead appeared in front of him, and Changsu screamed, what is this? The card said, God of Negation, 44%. The rabbit said, it's just special effects. Why was he so scared? Changsu asked, which god would have such a presentation? He thought, even the name, God of Negation, it sounds disgusting, and the percentage is so-so. He asked, could he, by any chance, choose again? The rabbit answered, of course. MC thanked him, and after a while said, no. After a while he said, just a minute, are you serious? MC reached for a new card and screamed, well, this time for sure. He pulled out a card and screamed, this god of negation again. This is some kind of scam. How does he keep getting the same card? The rabbit said, Mr. Changsu, the cards are fine. Does he understand? MC answered, no, he doesn't mean there's something wrong with the cards. He thought, what? Why did he suddenly become so serious? The rabbit said, this is his last chance. Please let him choose properly. MC reached out a shaking hand to the cards and thought, he doesn't care what happens as long as it's not the god of denial again. He's begging, please. Flower petals appeared in front of him and he cried out, yes. He looked at the card and thought he would get something, but the effects were somehow unimpressive. And yet, What an incredibly low odds. The card said, Goddess of Abundance, much less than 1%. Changsu thought, and this is the Goddess of Abundance. The rabbit looked at him displeasedly and asked, what did he imagine? He had a kind of disgusting look. He smiled and asked if he should give him another chance. MC thought, didn't he tell him that this was the last? He asked what would happen if he chose what fell out. The rabbit said, then he would have to leave immediately. MC asked the question, that is, right now? The rabbit asked, is there any reason to delay? This is his chance to be transported and then returned. Everyone will revere him, Mr. Changsu. They might even call him the savior. Let him think about it. A life so different from his current one will open up for him. MC thought, that's right. If everything remains as is, he will forever be marking time. He needs to make a decision. The system window reported. It congratulates him. He now serves the Goddess of Abundance. The form of the god he has chosen will be revealed. Welcome. A promising transported one. He saw the goddess's silhouette and thought, was that the Goddess of Abundance just now? He feels that with such a goddess, he is capable of anything. He replied, okay, where will he be transported now? The rabbit replied, excellent decision. In that case, let's go. A portal appeared in front of them, into which the rabbit began to push MC. Changsu screamed, wait a minute. The rabbit asked, what's wrong? MC asked, are they going there? It doesn't look very friendly. The rabbit asked irritably, where would the portal get its friendliness? He ordered him to look closely. Isn't it wonderful? Changsu thought fearfully. All he sees now is a frightening and dangerous black hole. However, he will not back down anymore. He will show everyone what he can do. The rabbit kicked him, and MC quickly flew into the portal. He screamed loudly, terrible rabbit. He said that he will wait with him impatiently. Mr. Changsu. A voice rang out. Why did he do this? The rabbit answered, he knows the reason. Direct intervention is prohibited. The voice said, it said, they can't lose him. Has he really still not abandoned his god? The rabbit answered sadly, of course not. The system window showed loading. MC looked at it and asked, so what now? The system window reported, a hint. The god's percentage indicates the degree of his influence. Changsu asked again, what? So that percentage wasn't a drop probability, but an indicator of influence? He flew out of the portal and fell to the ground. MC grabbed his head and asked, an indicator of his influence then? And they are telling him about this only now? He looked around and saw the ruins and laughed out loud. He thought, what a nightmare. This is definitely the end for him. So this is supposed to be a world protected by the Goddess of Abundance? What abundance are we talking about if these are literally abandoned lands? He turned around when he saw a system window behind him. Changsu asked, what kind of system window is this? It said, welcome to the world of block-type territory capture. Changsu, he is the apostle of abundance. He needs to protect as many territories as possible by capturing them. Changsu asked, is it really because her influence is so weak? He sighed and said, he won't waste time. He'd better look around and try to find the goddess at the same time. He heard a knock and asked, is that it? He looked down and asked, is that a sickle? Why exactly a sickle? Did someone use it and leave it behind? He was more or less familiar with the tool, which he was glad about, but still, he felt a gaze behind him and thought, is that a monster? A nightmare. He hasn't even met the goddess yet, and he's already encountered a monster. He can't just die like that. He'll at least try to scare him with a sickle. Changsu turned around and swung the sickle sharply, when suddenly he heard a squeak. A small hamster was standing in front of him and squealing. MC asked, is it a hamster? Changsu crouched down next to it and asked if it could be called a monster. It didn't look hostile at all. The hamster squeaked back, and MC asked, and still, if it was a monster, maybe he would get something for catching it? The hamster got really scared and squeaked, starting to wave its paws. MC stood up and said, well, okay, as long as they don't gather in groups, everything should be fine. The hamster ran to the side and Changsu asked, is it already running away? The hamster turned around and started waving its paw, to which MC looked questioningly. He asked, maybe he wanted him to follow him? The hamster ran forward happily, and Changsu thought, he's so small, but he runs so fast. Where is he going? After a while, the hamster squeaked, and MC tiredly asked, well, what else? He cried out, water. MC went to the spring and started filling a bottle with water. He quickly drank the water and happily said, it's like he was born again. The hamster squeaked in response. Changsu asked, by the way, does he live here? This isn't the best place for a hamster to live. Maybe he also knows the location of the goddess? You know, the goddess of abundance. The hamster squeaked questioningly and started licking his paws. MC thought, what did he expect? No feedback. The hamster squeaked and started pointing to the side, and Changsu asked, does he want him to follow him again? Okay, he'll see where it leads him this time. After a while, they came to a large tree, and MC raised his head and thought, this is a pretty big tree, but it looks dried out, like trees on the ground. He heard a crunch and asked, what is it? He saw that he stepped on a root and asked, is this ginseng? What is it doing here? The hamster saw it and squealed in fear, rushing to the ginseng root. Changsu asked to forgive him. Is this his pet? The system window reported, a hint. He found the god of this territory. MC asked, what kind of nonsense is this? A hint? So he found a goddess? Where is she then? The hamster grabbed his pants with his teeth and squealed, and Changsu asked, what does he want? He picked up the hamster and said, by the way, he is busy. They can play later. The hamster pointed his paws to the side and squealed loudly. He crossed his arms over his chest, and then straightened them out and took on a painful look. MC said, oh well, could this twisted ginseng really be a god? He shook with fear and said, no, that's impossible. His goddess was supposed to be the goddess goddess of abundance. He would never believe that this dried ginseng was her. Yeah, he wondered what that green glow was. They were joking. It was obvious to everyone that this was ordinary ginseng. The goddess he saw, she wasn't some kind of plant. The hamster showed him a magnifying glass and squeaked. The small print said that the image may differ from the final product. Changsu cried out, "What? No, his goddess!" He fell to his knees in front of the root and clutched his head. He thought, the seizure of territories, the percentages, all of this was an omen. If you think about it, every time he drew the same card, the percentage grew. He considered this nothing more than a mistake. But it turned out that this was happening because of the growth of his influence. But who would have thought that card was good if he came across it time after time? Is it possible that the goddess became like that because of the low percentage of this influence? The system window reported, the goddess of abundance, it's much less than 1%. MC asked, and yet, why doesn't she wake up? The hamster squealed with tears in his eyes, and Changsu screamed in fear, "Come on." He didn't finish her off completely, right? He opened a bottle of water and offered to try giving her some water. Maybe she was tormented by thirst. He poured water on the root, which immediately began to look better. MC asked, "Did it work?" "Great, he will give some more." The hamster looked at it in fear, and the goddess thought, how refreshing. Is that rain? How long has it been since she felt water? How good. But somehow a lot of this is pouring down. Enough already. At this rate, she will drown. She will really die. She opened her eyes, and MC cried out joyfully. She woke up. The hamster looked at her joyfully and squeaked, and Changsu said, "He is the apostle of abundance, Changsu." He looked at her and thought, this is his main god, but why can't she even move normally? He has no idea what to do now. The system window said he needs to use skills to become even stronger. He asked, so there are skills here too? Blessing of abundance? There's no description, but it's definitely something to do with improving the quality of the harvest. What's this? The system window said blessing of abundance, beheading. Changsu asked, beheading? He thought, so it's like beheading? Living a rich life, cutting off the heads of the bourgeoisie. So what does abundance mean here? It can't be that the goddess of abundance gave such a cruel skill. He turned to the goddess and asked, this skill, beheading, it's not what he thinks it is, right? She ran her hand near her body where her neck might be. MC asked fearfully, so she's not asking him to cut off heads, right? The goddess folded her arms, and Changsu thought, if you think about it, since the goddess of abundance is associated with agriculture, maybe slaughtering cattle also counts? Wait a second. He turned and looked at the hamster and thought, that means, does even this little one count? The hamster looked at him, and Changsu asked for forgiveness. He swung his sickle and said, this is his duty as an apostle. The hamster squealed in fear and began to run away, dodging his blows. The goddess widened her eyes in surprise and covered the hamster with her body. MC said he didn't want that either, but it was all for the goddess. The hamster and goddess looked in fear at something behind MC and screamed, and he turned and asked, is there something there? A dark creature was walking towards them, and Changsu wondered, what's going on? The hamster shielded the goddess, and MC looked at him and thought, nightmare, so this kid wasn't a monster? He was wrong. Then it turns out he has to deal with that creature. But will he be able to? Changsu gripped the handle of the sickle and thought, no, he has to, and he clearly sees exactly where he should chop. The system window reported that he can use the decapitation skill. MC swung the sickle and rushed to attack. The hamster and the goddess widened their eyes in fear, and the monster evaporated. MC turned around and asked, is she okay, goddess? He looked at the hamster and thought, this kid almost immediately began to protect the goddess. Changsu fell to the ground and bowed. He screamed. He was so sorry. He was terribly stupid. The hamster looked at him questioningly, and MC asked if he would forgive him. The hamster waved his paws and gave him a thumbs up. Changsu asked, he will forgive him then? Thank you, Hamdal. The hamster looked at him questioningly, and MC said he had come up with a name for him. What was it? He thought he needed to call him something since they would be together now. Hamdal looked at him affectionately, and a system window appeared behind MC. It announced that the head would be automatically transferred due to the skill effect. Hunting an immortal demon. One from the unknown. It dissolved, and Changsu smiled slightly and said, so this creature was called an immortal demon. This is an incomparably creepy name, considering the monster's complexity. The system window announced that the transferred offering now belongs to the goddess. He turned around and asked in surprise, goddess? She seemed to have become smoother, he thought. So if he continued doing this, she would return to her abundant form. Changsu shouted, great. He will go hunting again, goddess. Hamdal ran after him and squealed happily. After a while, he stopped in a gloomy forest where immortal demons stood. The system window reported a hint. There are points of indefinite purpose. They are used for actions within the world system. They cannot be exchanged with others. MC asked again, points? And when does he get them? At least it sounds like something useful. First, he needs to get rid of those creatures. He turned around and thought, he's glad he has the skill. It's powerful and surprisingly easy to use. Not to mention, those monsters are terribly slow. The system window reported activating the skill decapitation. Changsu attacked the monsters, and the system windows reported that he gets points by hunting monsters. MC said, great. Will they start by hunting 100 monsters? The system window reported, hunting an immortal demon. 4 from the unknown. After a while, he walked further into the forest, and Hamdol squealed happily. He jumped onto MC's shoulder and started waving his paws. Changsu smiled and said everyone who saw this would think that he caught them all. Hamdol began waving his paws in front of MC, who smiled happily. He looked at the system window and asked, by the way, why are they called immortal demons? They die too easily to be called immortal. Well, he guesses he will find out if he continues to hunt them. He saw a goddess near the tree and cried out, "Goddess!" As expected, she is becoming more and more abundant. Changsu smiled and thought, the effect is even better than he imagined. The hamster looked at him displeased, and MC thought, at this rate, she will soon return to her original form. The goddess waved her hand at him, and Changsu asked, what should he do next? He looked at the tree and asked, should he bring her to the tree? He took her in his palm and lifted her up, after which the goddess put her hand to it. He asked, should he too? Changsu placed his palm on the tree, and the system window informed him that he could use the skill Blessing of Abundance. All favors consume points. He said, Blessing of Abundance. A bright glow began to emanate from the tree, and Hamdol and the goddess stared in surprise. Changsu thought, okay, the points earned from hunting monsters? He will invest them all. The branches of the half-withered tree began to grow leaves, and a moment later, fruit. MC said, done. Is this an apple? He plucked one and thought, he's never seen one like this on Earth. Were apples always this huge and heavy? He wanted to try it, but before that, he knelt before the goddess and said, he dedicates the first harvest to the goddess. She shyly hugged the apple, and Changsu thought, he hopes she will soon return to her former appearance. However, her current form is also cute in its own way. He looked questioningly at the apple, which had begun to dry out, and his eyes widened. He thought, how could she consume something like that? It would be better for him not to incur her wrath. He climbed the tree and began picking apples. After a while, he came down and offered Hamdol some food too. He figured she was a god who granted skills like decapitation, so he better be on his guard. He reached his teeth for the apple and thought, yes, he should keep his eyes open, but how delicious. This apple, it's simply delicious. He ate the apple and cried, and the goddess watched them from behind the tree. She thought, what's going on? He defeated the monsters in just a day and nourished the enormous tree in an instant. And where do monsters like this child come from? The Abundance faction, responsible for food supplies, was famous for its high-quality harvest and had never been considered weak. However, when the denial began to consume the other factions, Abundance was forced to flee. To survive, Abundance stopped trading and began hunting monsters. But their skills weren't designed for battle. They couldn't win a single one. As a last resort, they changed their basic skill, harvesting, to decapitation. But even this didn't save Abundance from falling. Decapitation isn't a combat skill for cutting off the heads of living monsters. It's simply a modified skill designed to return the heads of deceased monsters and animals. Abundance and warriors are incompatible things, so this was the best she could offer. However, if a person is incredibly strong, this skill will be useful. MC raised his sickle, turned around, and looked closely at the goddess, and she was terrified by his gaze. Changsu asked if he could take more apples. The goddess thought, how did this child end up here? Whatever the case, he is hers now. MC climbed a tree and asked, goddess? She hugged his leg and thought, she won't give him up to anyone. Changsu was scared and thought, she's not going to suck him dry, right? After a while, he walked toward the ruined building, carrying apples in a bag on his back. He said, the goddess had already fallen asleep. She must be completely exhausted. He placed her on the step and said with a smile, this day had been long for him too. He patted Hamdol on the cheek and he squealed happily. Suddenly, a loud noise was heard, and MC jumped in fright. He asked what that rumble out of nowhere was. He thought, the goddess hasn't woken up, has she? He only ate apples. That's why his stomach was growling. Apples alone won't be enough. MC grabbed his stomach and looked in surprise at the system window that appeared in front of him. It reported an event, delivery. He asked again, delivery? That sounds logical, since so many people get to other worlds from Earth. But don't they need to know where he is to make the delivery? He looked at the tired Hamdol and asked, he's really tired, right? Maybe he needs to sleep? Changsu put Hamdol next to the goddess and covered them with leaves. Sometime later, a girl walked quickly down the corridor at the Circulation Trading Company. She clenched her fists and burst into the office, throwing open the door with particular anger. The man sitting at the desk widened his eyes in fear. He asked, what's she doing here? What about the delivery? The girl asked. The boss? Is he making fun of her? He replied, he doesn't understand what she's talking about, but first, she needs to calm down. Hey Sujin, Apostle of Circulation, screamed. She's already in over her head, and now this nonsense has piled up. The guy looked at the system window, and Sujin continued screaming. Restricted area? A 3-day, 2-night business trip? He understands, right, that they're not getting a penny because of the free trade event? So what, is she supposed to survive on apples alone? The customer doesn't even have any money, so he's offering to barter for apples? What did she do wrong? Ryu replied, nothing, really. Quite the opposite. He folded his arms and said, she's too dedicated to her work. That's not bad, but if you constantly work overtime like she does, you can drive yourself to the grave. Let her take a break, even if it's under the pretext of a business trip. If she stays here, she'll immediately dive into work until she's finished. So let her go and cool her head. Sujin listened to him at first and then said irritably, he simply couldn't find anyone else for this order. Ryu laughed and said she caught him. He put his hands on her shoulders and asked, "So what? What if she stumbles upon a hidden dimension?" Sujin asked, "A hidden dimension?" He says, "That's a bad joke." Ryu pushed her out of the office and said, "Well, have a nice trip. Maybe this trip will turn out well." Sujin sighed and said, "Okay." She's off. She opened the system window and started looking through the documents. Sujin wondered why the order list was so huge. If she was going to travel to the restricted area, she should have taken care of it in advance. She hoped something would really come of this. Otherwise, he'd be in for a rough ride. After some time, MC was collecting apples and looking for his hidden companion. His fur was showing. Hamdal was sitting behind an apple and squealing happily, and MC was looking around and telling him not to laugh. Otherwise, he would hear him. Changsu asked in a creepy voice where he was hiding. Hamdal got scared and MC asked, "Really behind that apple?" He caught it and Hamdal squealed in fear and cried. Changsu happily said, "I've got him, the rascal." He told him not to gnaw on those apples. No help. He patted Hamdal on the belly and said, he repeats again, "This isn't for eating, it's for sale. The delivery should arrive today. What if the deal falls through because of him?" He thought, they'll come this far. He can't make a bad impression. According to the information he received by participating in the event, this world, as was clear from the title of the first event, is divided into territories called blocks. From the outside, it looks like regular Earth, but the block boundaries are marked by a shimmering wall. To move to another block, you need a travel ticket, which is given once a day, but there's absolutely nothing around it. Even the nearest settlement is about a week away. MC said he had to survive on apples alone. It's crazy that delivery only takes 2 days. He lay down on the ground and said he has no idea what kind of trick they use, but he's just waiting for his sleeping bag, although a bed would be better right away, and a pillow for the goddess, of course. Changsu thought he needed to win her sympathy to avoid turning into a mummy. Suddenly, he felt someone's presence and turned around, grabbing his sickle. MC said it looks like they even provided him with monster delivery. They've been coming for his soul since yesterday. He saw a large number of monsters and said, they really are immortal, as the name says. Although revivalists would have been more appropriate. Anyway, time to deal with them. MC quickly rushed forward and began striking. He turned back, where a huge monster hand appeared above him. He dodged the attack and thought, as he thought, they move slightly faster. Do monsters get stronger, like skills? And yet it's hardly a significant improvement. Changsu swung his sickle and quickly dealt with all the creatures. At that moment, Sujin had already arrived at the right place and looked questioningly at what was happening. She thought, this is madness. What is this? An undead ghoul. This monster was once a prime target for hunting, as it gave the most points for killing it. However, no matter how many times it was killed, it reappeared the next time, but stronger than before. It later turned out that this monster will pursue its killer, even if they move to an adjacent block. To make matters worse, the monster curses its target, which ultimately leads to their death. Now, absolutely everyone avoids undead ghouls. MC swung his sickle and attacked the monster, and Sujin wondered, who is this madman? Doesn't the consequences frighten him at all? And it doesn't look like he's somehow cleansing the curse. Is he a sword master? But why is a sword master dealing with apples? And he's not holding a sword. She won't push it. You never know what might happen if you anger him. A system window appeared in front of MC, which he quickly glanced at. He said happily, he got even more points. Before, it was 5% and now it's all of 10%. Changsu thought, 1 apple costs 1,000 points. So today he should be able to get 100 of them without any problems. At first, he wondered what the temple was doing here. Maybe this block provides more points? He turned around and saw Sujin, who apologized to Changsu's customer. She bowed and said she was glad to welcome him. Her name is Hei Sujin, from the circulation company. His order has been delivered. MC asked how she found him so easily. She laughed and replied, he really stands out. She shook his hand and thought, he dealt with the ghouls like they were kindergartners. She can't let her guard down. She can't. She looked at Hamdal and wondered, what is this fluffy marshmallow ball? She thought, slightly embarrassed. She wants to touch it. She wants to touch it. Hamdal hid behind MC and he asked if she was unwell. Sujin answered, no, everything is fine. She grabbed her heart and thought, she wants to touch it. Changsu asked, in that case, will they go? Had he screwed up somewhere? Sujin thought how she wanted to touch it. After a while, they approached the baskets of apples, and Sujin continued to look at Hamdal with delight. She stopped and said, the aroma from the apples is simply wonderful. MC turned around and asked if she doubted it. They were also very tasty. He approached the apple tree and started collecting apples into baskets. Sujin looked around and thought, is this really an apple tree? It's so huge. Changsu asked if she wanted to try it. Sujin asked again, is it possible? She picked up the huge apple in her hands and her eyes widened in surprise. She thought, not only the tree, but the apples themselves were gigantic too. But when the fruit grows too big, it loses its density and sweetness. It's probably just for show. She took a bite of the apple and thought, what? It tastes delicious. The fruit isn't just sweet, but also moderately sour, which creates perfect harmony. With a taste like that, it's worth at least 50,000. No, with proper advertising, it could be sold for a full 100,000 gold pieces. Sujin said, Changsu's client. He asked 2,000 gold pieces for 1 apple, right? MC replied, yes. Sujin muttered, no matter how you look at it, this is simply an absurd price. Changsu asked, did she think he was exaggerating? They probably sell it for less in stores. Then how much? Sujin showed him 2 fingers and MC asked again, 200, but that's too much. Sujin answered, 20,000. He should value it at least 20,000 gold. MC cried out in surprise, 20,000 gold? Hamdal supported him in this and squealed loudly. Sujin said that if he goes to sell in supermarkets, he should bet 30,000. Changsu asked, is it that expensive? These are just apples, and she's already talking about selling in supermarkets? Sujin thought she could hide the truth from him, but she doesn't want to lose a potential hot client. Besides, she only has one life. She replied, these are not just apples. Even having tried many fruits around the world, this is the first time she has tried such a delicious product. She thinks the cost of this apple is higher than many other specialty goods. So she suggested that he calculate the deal for now at a price of 20,000 gold each. She took the contract out of her bag and opened it. Sujin spoke, and she would like to formalize the sale through an official contract. What will he say? MC silently took the pen from her hands and smiled. He said, okay. He suggested doing so. After a while, Sujin said that she thought he made a mistake. They would get a higher percentage this way. MC smiled and said that he just wants to do business with a good person on a long-term basis. If she was honest and told him the true cost of the apples, then everything is fair, right? He extended his hand to her, and Sujin looked at him in surprise. She smiled and thanked him for concluding the contract. Okay, now she needs to give out his order, right? Here are his various seeds, food, and kitchen utensils, and also familiar eggs, a gift from the company for concluding a business deal. This should help in his activities. He already has one, so he doesn't need instructions. She looked at Hamdal and thought, such a cutie too. Changsu asked again, him? A familiar? Sujin asked, isn't this baby his familiar? He's too friendly for a monster. She asked to forgive the misunderstanding. Changsu smiled and said no, it's okay, let her just explain what to do with it. Sujin replied that the more points he infuses through the blessing, the stronger the familiar will be born. But he should be careful. Too much infusion can destroy the egg. She recommends stopping when the egg starts to shake violently. MC replied that he would do his best not to overdo it. Sujin asked, by the way, could he tell what the volume of the next harvest will be and when to expect it? Changsu replied that since he plans to grow other crops as well, he will be able to provide about 50 apples a day. Changsu asked again, 50 a day. He said they discussed the supply cycle, the quantity to be sold, and the schedule. After discussing a number of details, the first deal was sealed. After a while, MC looked at the goddess and said, it must have been hard for her to hide. He thought, he's glad he hit her before the hunt. That girl doesn't seem like a bad person, but it's better to be safe. After a while, he looked around and said, he never thought he could become so rich from selling just apples. All thanks to the goddess. She stood up and hugged the eggs that lay in the nest next to her. Changsu thought, in order to use the blessing on the eggs, he needed more points. He should expand the list of those he hunts. Now there are none at all. A system window appeared in front of him asking him to vote for his monster. MC grimaced and then grinned slightly and thought, he has so many things to worry about now and everything is going better than expected. There is still a lot to do in the future, but he's not afraid. He's even looking forward to it. After a while, Ryu asked, apostle or believer? This man probably belongs to the alchemist class. He stabbed a piece of apple with a fork, and Sujin said that it was known that he was Korean, and most likely he belongs to the war or cruelty class. What he's planning is still unknown. Ryu said, well, all apostles are Korean, so there's no doubt about it. So, she's saying that the man who grew these apples belongs to the martial class? Sujin lowered her head and replied, he defeated the ghoul with a single worn sickle, and he kills exclusively by cutting off heads. Ryu tasted the apple, and said that it looks like he's going to become a sword master through training with limitations. It's better to hide his existence than to try to protect him. Sujin replied that she thought so too. Ryu suggested that she sell these apples to the supermarket. They'll definitely be a hit. Sujin grabbed his hand, and Ryu asked again, what's wrong? He ordered her to take her hand away. Sujin told him he'd already eaten everything on his own. Ryu cried out in displeasure. He's the eldest. Sujin answered him in displeasure, but she brought the apples. They're hers. After a while, MC sat next to the eggs and released energy towards them. He asked, who will emerge from this? A cute creature or a hard-working one? Well, any of them would be nice to receive. The egg began to crack and Changsu cried out joyfully, it's hatching. It's coming out. The egg cracked and MC thought it's an SSS ranked familiar. He said, here it is. The shell flew off and a chick appeared in front of Changsu. He squealed and MC turned pale at what he saw. He thought, a chick? And he spent 120,000 points on this? No, he must admit, the chick is very big, but he'll grow up to be just a chicken, right? He was hoping to get something useful. He supposes he can be raised and then eaten. The chicken bowed, and Changsu said with tears in his eyes, He hasn't had a chicken in a long time. 120,000 points for a chicken. You better not get attached. He'll give him the first name that comes to mind. MC said, from now on, his name is Ari. He is Changsu. Ari pointed his wing at the egg, which also began to shake and squeaked, and MC said, another one is about to appear. A bright glow illuminated them and MC thought, this time it will give him a worker. A piglet appeared in front of him and grunted, and MC became completely gloomy and said, he will be Doji. He thought, why is he getting livestock? Calling them service animals is somehow wrong. After a while, Ari said, the 10th vassal, the chicken, greets the goddess of abundance. Doji said, the 12th vassal, the pig, greets the goddess of abundance. The goddess said, so much time has passed. She asks for forgiveness. She was unable to protect them. Ari asked her not to say that. They should be asking for forgiveness for not being able to serve her properly. Doji said they will do everything to help them regain their beautiful true form. The goddess said she is grateful, but they need to be wary of something. They need to beware of her apostle. He doesn't know that they are her vassals. If this guy decides that they are useless, he can simply sell them, or even eat them. So they need to demonstrate their usefulness until he begins to understand them. Doji asked fearfully, is this really true? Ari asked with a smirk, an apostle? He looks like a real weakling. He offered to watch him for now. After a while, MC woke up and went to work. He asked, does another day begin with them guys? Good morning. He rushed to attack and began to quickly deal damage to the monsters. Ari asked, what was that noise this morning? Doji asked, cutting? They widened their eyes in surprise when they saw what was happening. Ari screamed, what the hell is that? Did he use decapitation? Changsu swung his sickle and cut down a few more monsters. Ari said, come to think of it, he's sure the apostle licked his lips when he looked in their direction. Doji asked fearfully, huh? Ari answered, definitely. He can actually eat them. The system window reported, Immortal Demon Hunt, 202 units from unknown. MC wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, he finally got rid of them. He heard rustling and looked away. He asked, when did they appear here? Ari smiled and squeaked. He said, dear apostle, he worked so hard. He must be terribly tired. Doji said, apostle, good morning. Ari hit him with his paw and told him to smile. MC smiled and thanked them. He said how wonderful they were. After a while, he cut an apple and asked, do they want some? Doji shouted, yes, please. Ari told him to calm down. They can't give the impression that they only eat. MC told him to eat and grow big. Doji laughed and said how delicious it was. He heard that the meat of a pig raised on grapes is very popular. I wonder if a fruit diet also improves the taste of the meat? Ari thought fearfully. Stop eating, pig. No need to turn into apple-flavored bacon. He grabbed it and pulled it away, and MC asked, Ari, does he want some too? Ari thought, this aroma. He used at least 500 points. Is he completely crazy? An ordinary apostle earns that much in a day. He turned away and said, he won't fall for that. Changsu asked, doesn't he like apples? Maybe the beans will suit his taste? Ari's eyes widened in fear. Then he began to shake with desire and thought, he's not like that pig. He'll never become fried chicken. Changsu asked, so Ari is picky about food. Unlike Doji, a 3-minute farming lesson from Changsu. Let Doji plow the soil and Ari plant black beans in it. Next, cover the beans with dirt and water. Next, apply the blessing of abundance. Do they see? Is it simple? Their goddess is the best. MC said, this is perfect. Suddenly, he felt someone's eyes on him and turned around. He twirled the bean from side to side and Ari watched. He wondered if chickens like shiny things. Changsu said, no, stop. The first harvest must be given to the goddess. The goddess smiled and then fell to the ground. MC thought fearfully, he'll never get used to her way of eating. Changsu said, now they can eat. They still need to plant regular and sweet potatoes. Doji ate some soil and said, delicious, delicious. MC said Doji is a real glutton, which doesn't surprise him. But Ari, he thought, was picky. After a while, they ate their fill and fell to the ground. Ari said his appetite eventually got the better of him. He cried and said he was finished. Changsu smiled and said he was glad to see they were eating well. Soon he would grow another harvest for them. That's right. The apples will go on sale today. I wonder if everything will go well? At that moment, Ryu said in the supermarket, okay, the setup is almost complete. Are there only apples left? He saw that many people had already gathered near the counter and was surprised by this. He thought about it, but as expected, no one was buying anything. The apple lay with a gold coating and bird feathers. This is the Imperial Apple for 200,000 gold. Ryu thought. They gave it a flashy name, the Imperial Apple, and made the packaging as provocative and expensive as possible. But the price tag scares everyone, and they can't even arrange a tasting. How can he let them know that this product is worth buying? Once they try even a little piece, they will immediately understand everything. Suddenly he heard a voice, thank you for your purchase. He widened his eyes in surprise and turned around. Ryu asked, what's going on there? He ran to the counter and asked, what's all the fuss about? The seller asked the senior salesman to take a look. The Imperial Apples are all sold out. Ryu asked, what? Just recently, all the shelves were full. The guy replied, well, that man tried one apple and bought everything there was. There was a signature on the sales receipt. Lohan, I think? He thinks that man is famous. He's new to this business, so he doesn't know. Ryu looked at the guy leaving and shouted, Lohan? That one? The one who went through training with restrictions for the first time? He is the one and only sword master. The fact that someone like him bought all the apples is a real sensation. Everyone in the shopping center looked after him and shouted, it's Lohan! Of course, he expected a stir among the masses. But Ryu saw the headline, an unshakable symbol, the food Lohan ate to become a sword master. He grabbed his head and screamed, How could they publish an article with such a headline? They called him, and he answered irritably. What? Will eating these apples automatically make them swordmasters? Of course not. It has nothing to do with them. Another call came on his phone. He answered and said, yes, Ryu from the Circulation Trading Company is on the line. Wait, a reservation of 100 boxes? Just like that? He said it's not that easy. It's been a week since MC arrived in this world. He lives a rather measured life. MC looked at the goddess and said, since the food is ready, he needs to get ready too. He held vegetables in his hands and said happily, they are as delicious as apples. He peeled and cut the potatoes and then began to cook. Doji approached him and started grunting, and MC looked thoughtfully at his hungry appearance. He asked, does he understand that he is not doing this for him? He just ate. Doji looked at him pitifully, and Chengsu sat down to him and gave him some food. At that moment, Sujin joyfully ran up to him and said, Mr. Chengsu. He greeted her, and she said, she sees he was able to awaken all the familiars, Mr. Chengsu. He replied, yes, that is so. By the way, what brought her here? Sujin replied, she had good news. Would he like to hear it? Just don't let him faint. His entire harvest was sold for 200,000 gold each. Both days there was not a single apple left. MC's eyes widened in surprise and screamed, 200,000 gold each? And 2 days in a row? Sujin told him not to mention it. She's keeping quiet about the chaos that reigns there, because even that is not enough for the people. MC thought, but apples aren't considered an expensive product. Are there really that many rich people there? So his share is 30% of the sales. Therefore, he gets 60,000 gold pieces per apple. If he sells 50, that's 3 million a day. Then, the annual income will be 1 billion? Chengsu imagined himself in expensive clothes, throwing money around. He thought, if so, maybe he could even find clues about the fate of his relatives. He clenched his fist and asked, the sales commission at the supermarket is very high, isn't it? Since they provided a bestseller, he will try to negotiate a lower price. He thought, he doesn't want to spoil the atmosphere, but Chengsu asked a question. How long do you think the excitement around the imperial apples will last? He thought, now they are bought up like this, but it is unlikely that they will sell at this price forever. Sujin replied that she understood his concerns, but given the potential buyers of 1 million, it would take 27 years to cover their needs at a rate of selling 100 apples a day. Besides, a core of loyal customers would certainly form. Chengsu asked if she was naming too many potential buyers. Sujin replied that if measured by Earth standards, it was a lot. But now the market is comparable to the size of the former China. He doesn't need to worry. So, Mr. Chengsu, could he consider increasing production? Chengsu replied that he had another crop ripe now. Wouldn't she like to try it? It's as good as apples. Sujin screamed. Had he grown something on the level of delicious apples? She grabbed his hand, and he thought she had cut off his blood flow. He didn't want to lose his fingers. After a while, MC thanked her for waiting and said that first she should try the boiled potatoes. Sujin thanked him for the food. She blew on the hot potato and tasted it. A moment later, she beamed with delight and said, the potatoes are sweet. You just need to add a little salt and you'll get the perfect sweet-salty combo. The skin has a slight nutty aroma. It's fantastic. And the texture of the potato itself is so airy. MC thought, thank goodness she liked it. He brought more dishes and said, he also made potato pancakes and french fries. Sujin combined the dishes and said, with tears in her eyes, it tastes like food from a first-class restaurant. French fries like these can be considered a main course, not an appetizer. Chengsu smiled and said he was glad she liked it. And the final dish is something Doji really liked. It's fried sweet potatoes. MC looked to the side, where Doji was already happily trying to beg for food. He was screaming, and him. Ari could barely stand behind him. Chengsu sat down with them and suggested that they all eat together. Ari, why has he become so thin? Hamdul climbed onto the table and happily touched the potato that Sujin was holding in her hand. She was touched again and thought how cute and fluffy it was. MC said he would like to sell this too. What would she say? Sujin said, first of all, thank him so much for such a delicious lunch. But will he be able to grow all this while simultaneously increasing apple production? MC replied that it would be difficult without extra points. He thought about it. He couldn't focus everything solely on growing crops. Sujin said that in that case she was grateful for his efforts. But couldn't he focus on apples? As he knew, all the apostles were Korean, and their culture leaves a significant imprint on the world. They were truly surprised to discover all this magnificent food, but ordinary products cannot make large sales, even if there is demand. Mr. Chengsu, the demand for apples will grow day by day. Please let him take her words into account, she begs him. She lowered her head and thought, given the large commission for sales at the supermarket, and after all the effort put into the harvest, he even treated her. Hadn't she been too cruel to him? This was a terrible mistake. MC asked again. 100 pieces, she said. Sujin asked in surprise. What? Chengsu replied. He would provide her with 100 apples a day. Sujin asked again. Is that true? MC nodded his head and thought he didn't need to cling to the difficult path, although the attempt was worth it. After all, she liked the food. Hamdul smiled, and Sujin thanked Mr. Chengsu. The next day, MC was walking through the dry forest with his assistants. Doji asked if it was right to follow him every time. It wasn't like they could help him with anything. Ari ordered him not to talk nonsense. If they weren't going to look after him, then who would? They can't ask that simple-minded hamster. MC walked forward and thought, why do they follow him every time? What if they really are combat familiars? It can't be that familiars are useless ballast, capable of only eating? At that moment, he saw them scream loudly, trying to escape from the monster. Changsu grabbed his head and said, this pisses him off. Bet he expected something. It's good that these immortal demons are slow. Suddenly, he saw the monster stretch out its hand towards Doji and screamed, what is he doing? Let him run away. Idiot, he thought. Nightmare, it's too far. He rushed to attack and ordered the monster not to approach their doji. Changsu thought, his blade is too short. Ari covered himself with his wings and screamed with tears in his eyes, then looked up and looked around. He saw that Changsu had dealt with the monster. MC wondered, what? He swung, but the attack radius increased? Did the skill just improve? He turned around and saw more monsters. MC considered the sickle's angle, its movement, and even the speed of the strike. He swung and quickly attacked the monsters. The system window reported that mass decapitation had been activated. The skill's range had expanded. Changsu asked, mass decapitation? What kind of name is that? MC turned around and said, oh well, since the attack range has expanded, he'll definitely be able to attract more regular customers. He began to quickly fight the monsters, and the animals watched in fear. Doji screamed, Goddess of Abundance. Ari cried out, Goddess, something terrible has happened. She turned around and asked, what's wrong? Where are they running so frantically from? Ari replied, the apostles started taking off 4 or 5 heads at a time. Although it's nice that he's getting stronger, wouldn't it be wiser to focus on developing his communication skill? The goddess ordered him to calm down first. She didn't give him such a skill. Ari screamed in fear. He's so scared he can't even eat properly. Doji said, he called it mass decapitation. And did she give him this skill? The goddess thought, mass? What? What is this? This is scary. She's never heard of such a skill. Is this really a person? Maybe it's actually a messenger from hell? Really? She said, guys, she thinks she understands what happened. Doji screamed, so the goddess did give him this skill after all. Ari hit him and said, idiot, let him shut up for a little while. So, what happened anyway? The goddess looked at him with fear and replied, it seems the apostle's skill has evolved. As they know, decapitation was originally a harvesting skill. When a skill evolves, it becomes available in a mass version. Do they remember? So the decapitation skill evolved into mass decapitation. Ari said with fear, but usually only apostles with at least a year of experience have this skill. Isn't that right? The goddess answered, that's right. So, he really is growing frighteningly fast, and yet he should be thanked. His monstrous growth is frightening, but it is thanks to him that they can now talk so calmly. When the apostle returns, she will give him the communication skill, so there's no need to worry. Ari asked for forgiveness. He behaved inappropriately. MC ran up to them and said, Goddess, he has returned. She waved to him and thought, she does not know where to start. She wants to talk to the apostle as soon as possible. First, she will introduce him to her subordinates. Changsu looked at the animals that joyfully ran towards him, and the system window announced that the god of abundance was granting the apostle a new skill. The goddess thought that limiting the apostle was breaking the rules of the world. A choice is given for him to decide for himself. 2 skills appeared in the system window in front of MC, the vow of abundance and communication. He must choose one of the skills. The goddess thought, of course, if he is her apostle, he will choose communication, but she still has to warn him. He needs to stay away from battles, and above all she will say, thank you. Thank him for choosing her. The system window reported, the skill has been selected. In accordance with the choice, he receives vow of abundance. The goddess looked at him questioningly and asked, what? The beginning of the incident. MC looked at the system window and thought, a new skill. Vow of abundance? You can't even imagine what that is. Communication. Is this, apparently, the ability to talk to animals and plants? He imagined Ari screaming. How could he do such a thing? He trusted him, considered him family. He will take revenge. He will peck him until the key breaks. The apple tree said, Changsu, has he tried giving 100 fruits a day? His shoulders are falling off. Honestly. MC thought, no, that's impossible. He finds it scary to even imagine. No wonder they say, the less you know, the better you sleep. Yes, communication should never be chosen. He clicked on the vow of abundance, after which everyone became very upset. He looked at them and wondered why everyone was suddenly so sad. Okay, he'll focus on skills. The system window reported that he had 2 skills, decapitation and the vow of abundance. Changsu thought, as expected, there was no description. A vow with the goddess of abundance. MC took out an apple and said he should apologize to the goddess. He handed her the apple and said, Goddess, here. Let her take it. The goddess turned away from him and he asked, puzzled, Goddess? The system window reported that points are returned from using a skill. MC wondered why she was offended. He didn't eat it, but gave it to her. So did that count? It turns out that if he keeps his promise, he gets points. It's like he's giving himself quests. He said this time he will pinch Hamdal on the cheek. It worked again. MC asked, well, is this the last time? Now he will stroke Doji's tummy. Everyone started to run away in fear and thought, what? MC said, he will make him say something. He fed Doji, who began to grunt happily. Changsu asked, what the hell? Why haven't the points returned? Is this a glitch? Is he really not full yet? He gave him more than 10,000. Well, that's it. His appetite is growing faster than the reward. He feels sorry for the lost points, but there is nowhere to go. Suddenly there was a scream. Mr. Changsu. Sujin ran up to him, and he asked, "Did she come again in a day? Did something happen?" Sujin answered, "Now is not the time at all. Hurry, he needs to capture and protect this block." Changsu asked, "What? Why so suddenly? Is someone going to attack?" Sujin screamed, "It's quite possible. Because of the crazy popularity of the Imperial apples, they limited sales to 1 per customer, and still there are already 5,000 orders." MC's eyes widened in surprise, and he asked again, 5,000? Sujin said, "And no one cares when they get them, as long as they get them as soon as possible. So soon marauders will descend upon this place to seize the apples and the block, and since this territory is outside the protection zone, it will be impossible to stop the criminals. If only they had backup." MC turned around and thought, backup? But he only had the goddess's protection. If he lost, it would be the end not only of the goddess, but of abundance itself. Sujin said they should at least capture the block and build a gate. MC said then they could create a camouflaged base and get even closer to them. Sujin replied, "Good idea. If they capture the block and build a gate, the access restrictions will disappear." Changsu asked, "But why such an influx of orders? This is abnormal." Sujin asked again, "Didn't he know?" The whole block went crazy because of the properties of the Imperial apples. MC asked again, "What properties?" Sujin answered, "They say that if you eat Imperial apples, your skill mastery improves faster, illnesses go away, new ones don't stick, your skin becomes clear, fatigue disappears, your teeth whiten, your weight decreases, and your memory improves. That's what they say." MC screamed, "Are they kidding? Maybe they should call them a panacea right away?" Sujin asked sadly, "So it's not true?" And she had hoped. Too bad. Changsu frowned and thought, how can this be true? He turned around and said, "First they'll seize the block, and then they'll sort it out." Sujin said, "Changsu, but what if it's true? What if?" MC screamed, "No, they're just apples." After a while, a guy was walking in the hospital corridor. The photographer peeked out from around the corner and asked, "Who is that? Does he think he's going to hit the jackpot today?" Hong Yun-soo, a great retired alchemist, was lying in the ward. He asked, "Is he here?" Lohan put the box on the nightstand and said, "Here's a treat." Yun-soo asked, "He knows he's being discharged today, right? Are these the apples?" Lohan asked again. "These apples?" Yun-soo replied, "Well, the ones he learned the secret about and therefore bought a whole mountain of." Rumors were already circulating. Lohan replied, "What nonsense." Yun-soo started peeling the apple and said, "That's what he thought." He tried the apple and his eyes widened in surprise. He screamed, "What's wrong?" The taste and nutrition seemed to be at their peak. "Are other apples just as delicious? What's the range in quality?" Lohan replied, "What? A culinary god." Yun-soo replied, "So even he can't tell the difference. How were they grown? Even with special fertilizer, it's impossible to enhance the flavor and aroma so evenly." He screamed loudly, "What a lunatic. Why is he eating his own treat?" Lohan replied, "So he shouldn't hesitate but eat faster." Yun-soo asked, "Does he think he has neither money nor time?" He took out his phone and said, "He'll buy it himself. He's a VIP client at circulation, right?" A voice on the other end of the line said, "Dear client, they apologize, but the line is huge." Yun-soo pointed at Lohan and asked, "Doesn't he have more? Let him sell it to him. He'll pay double, no triple." Lohan smiled and replied that he has money and time. Yun-soo screamed, "How low is that?" He threw a pillow at him and said, "He's still his friend, you idiot." Lohan asked again, "What? He doesn't eat it himself." The photographer took a photo, and after a while, breaking news appeared on the headlines. The great alchemist Hong Yun-soo was discharged immediately after eating the Imperial apple. A cure for the effects of alchemy? Is the Imperial apple really a panacea? Ryu slammed his hands on the table and screamed, "There's already a lot of talk about these rumors. Are they kidding me? And now they're making things even worse?" He said it wasn't a panacea. After a while, MC said, "Goddess, it looks like they'll have to take over the neighboring districts. He'll be leaving tonight." He asked Doji and Ari to keep an eye on their goddess. The goddess thought fearfully, he just got the skill and suddenly this? But this isn't a combat skill. She grabbed his leg and thought, "I can't go. It's too dangerous." MC looked at her and asked, "Goddess?" He thought, "Has the time finally come?" He said, "It's time for protein, but it's still quite tasty." He thought, he didn't have the courage to eat meat in front of them. Beef will do, right? That's what the goddess wants. Let them understand, please. After some time, in the warehouse, he said, he found it. This is the beef he ordered back then. So this is it, the real meat he'd only heard about. On Earth, they were only artificially made cuts. He'd only seen them in photographs. And even the photographs alone make his mouth water. After some time, he turned on the stove and started cooking. Changsu said, "You can tell from the aroma alone that this is a completely different level of meat quality." Doji screamed loudly, and MC thought, he can't. This is for the goddess. Ari shook his head and said, "Oh well, he just ate, but he wants more. If not, what about the goddess?" He turned around and thought, was there not enough food? The goddess must be hungry. He needs to try it. MC turned around and said, "Almost ready. Let her wait a little longer." "Well, goddess first. Careful, it's still hot." The goddess began to jump on a piece of meat and thought, no way, he doesn't need to leave. MC asked, "Has the meat gone bad or something?" "She's not angry, is she?" He just bought it. He decided to try it and took a piece with chopsticks. He said thoughtfully, "Delicious. It really is delicious." "Then what's the matter?" Changsu thought, "What a pity. Apparently, apples are better. Is that why the goddess doesn't want to eat it?" It seems she didn't like the taste at all. The goddess looked at him with tears in her eyes and asked him not to leave. "Please, he can't leave. No need. Don't leave her. Please, she begs." MC sat down next to her and smiled. He said he would go look for tastier meat. Let her wait a bit. Sometime later, at 10 o'clock in the evening, all the animals were asleep, and the goddess sat and looked away. MC looked around and said, "This is the block boundary." It seemed endless to him, but in fact it is not. The system window said, "He wants to move to block 35N10, MC said quickly. The system window loaded and said, "A hint. Travel tickets are restored every day at midnight." Changsu said, "Even when moving to another block, hints appear. It's calming." After a while, he looked at the lantern in his hand and asked, "Why did the lantern go out so terribly? Horrible." He looked around and asked, "Is this a jungle? Everything here is different from where he was." He looked around and saw a dark swarm of insects. The creatures flew towards him, and MC began to run away in fear. He turned around and asked, "What are these bugs?" He swung his sickle and screamed, "It's too short. He can't cut their necks." He thought, what a nightmare. He needs to go back. He stretched out his hand and saw monsters appearing from the portal. Changsu asked, "Undead ghouls?" This was so unexpected. What are they doing here? Have they really come to protect him? The monsters growled, which meant that they were the ones who had to defeat him. So now they would fight alongside him. They ran alongside him and MC screamed in fear, "What's wrong with him?" He looked around and thought, these bugs disappear when the ghouls attack them. There it is. Changsu quickly dodged to the side and thought, first they retreat. The ghouls stretched out their hands towards him, and MC closed his eyes. He ran through the portal and said, "Barely escaped." The system window said, "Hint, he gets bonus points for destroying a leveled up monster." Changsu asked, "Bonus points? So he gets points for those destroyed by the ghouls too? That's a real gold mine." Now that's something else entirely. Their guests also gain weight, right? MC said, "Well, really, it's impossible not to love them. No bonus weighting." After a while, Sujin said, "Ryu, she's going crazy because of the complaints. The rumors about the Imperial apples are already going too far." Ryu replied that before, he hadn't interfered for marketing reasons, but like she said, they can't let these rumors involve them anymore. From now on, any mention of the Imperial apples is forbidden. He ordered her not to answer calls or interviews, to ignore all questions and to remain silent. Sujin asked, "Is that possible? There will be complete chaos, won't it?" Ryu screamed, "Yes, even if they put a knife to her throat, let her not say anything. This needs to be sorted out." Sujin asked, "There? What he just said. What if they really put a knife to her throat?" Ryu asked again, "What? Is she joking like that right now? What nonsense is she talking about? Is there anyone behind him by any chance?" "There is no one, right?" A man stood behind him holding a sword over his shoulder. He apologized if he scared him. It was just a friendly greeting. Ryu turned around and thought, is this man Lohan, the swordmaster? A greeting? Is this really not a threat? How did he even get in here? He asked, "Why did he come?" Lohan answered, "He was with the president, but he didn't say a word. He hoped that he wouldn't be like that. The supplier of Imperial apples. Where is he now?" Ryu stood up and answered, "Yes." He pulled Sujin out in front of him and ordered her to explain it to him herself. She turned around and whispered discontentedly, "Is he kidding me? Why is he hiding behind her back Sunday?" He asked. How was he supposed to know that he would actually come with a sword? Sujin frowned and said, "That's right. They said you can't trust any senior." She said if he met with their director, he should know. Their company, Circulation, doesn't sell customer data. She stopped and widened her eyes, and Lohan said, "That's how it is. He wanted to solve everything the easy way, but he'll have to do it differently." He grabbed the hilt of the sword again, which really scared everyone. Sujin and Ryu huddled together and thought, they're all going to die. Let him spare them. Lohan threw the sword on the floor and said, "You'll find it by instinct." They asked, puzzled. "What?" Sujin asked. "By instinct? What does that even mean?" Lohan turned around and started to leave. Ryu said, "Swordmasters have instincts different from theirs. They say Lohan has found what he needs this way more than once." Sujin thought, is that even possible? 2 days later, MC stood in front of the door and spoke. He still didn't come. She was in such a hurry then. He even got worried. He remembered how Sujin said in fear, "Mr. Changsu, the Swordmaster will visit this block soon." MC was sitting on a stump and asking, "Can't Swordmasters move freely?" "Yes, even delivery is faster. 2 days and it's ready." The system window reported that someone entered the block. MC said, "Here it is." He remembered him. Here he is. He stood in front of the door and looked at it puzzledly, from where no one appeared. He asked, "Is there a glitch? Everyone only enters through the main entrance. It doesn't look like a system error. Perhaps he will look around just in case." He looked ahead in surprise and asked, "What is this?" He saw a crack in front of him and asked, "Did he cut the block boundary? Is this even possible?" Lohan came out of his crack to meet him. Changsu thought, is this Swordmaster Lohan? He asked, "Does he grow Imperial apples?" MC asked, "Mr. Lohan? Changsu, what does he owe such a visit to?" He still found it. Lohan said he came to buy apples. MC asked, just like that, "How many does he need?" Lohan answered, 100. If possible, even 200 would be better. Changsu shouted, "What? This is impossible. The maximum is 50. Lohan answered he understood. MC thought, he doesn't look upset. Maybe he imagined it? He asked, "How much is he willing to give?" Lohan answered, 20,000 gold each. MC said, "He has no packaging." Lohan replied, "That's no problem." Changsu said, "Isn't that the price as in the store?" Lohan said he knows. MC thought, maybe he should sell all 100, even at a loss. He turned around, and after a while they approached the apple tree. Changsu thought, he has no emotions. His face didn't change even for a second. The calm of a swordmaster? Lohan at that moment was salivating with anticipation of the apples. He thought, although the apples really are delicious. MC asked, So, will 50 do? The system window reported that the Blessing of Abundance skill had been activated. He released energy toward the tree, after which fruit quickly appeared on the branches. Chengsu said he'd have to wait a bit. The harvest was underway. Lohan grabbed the hilt of his sword and ordered him to step aside. MC asked, "What?" Lohan quickly ran forward and started swinging his sword. He chopped all the apples off the branches and collected them in his belt pouch. MC looked at this in surprise and thought, "No, seriously, this is some kind of cheat." The system window reported that 10 million gold had been credited to his account. Lohan showed him the card and thanked him. He'd come back. Changsu extended his hand after him and asked him to wait. He thought for a moment. He dealt with those parasites from the previous zone with repellent plants, but they didn't know what awaited them in the next block. Lohan could be a great help with that, especially since he had a free pass. The system window reported that 10 million gold had been credited to the account. He asked if he might be interested in other crops as well. He grew them himself. He'd definitely like them. Lohan turned around and asked what exactly. MC replied, "Very tasty potatoes." Lohan replied, "Not interested." Changsu asked, "Sweet potatoes perhaps?" Lohan replied, "Also no." MC said, "Then beans." Lohan turned around and replied, "Not interested. He'll probably go." Changsu thought, he can't let him go. MC shouted, "Apples. He'll give you more apples." He thought, he's strange of course, but he doesn't seem bad. He said that in order to ensure the supply of imperial apples, they need to capture the neighboring block. For this, he would like to ask for his help, Mr. Lohan. In exchange for apples. Lohan turned around and froze, and MC thought, wasn't he being too impudent? Lohan said, "Stable supplies then." He showed him 2 fingers, and MC asked, "That's 20 apples, right?" Lohan nodded back. He left the block through the same crack, and MC said, "Any quickly." He never thought that he would agree so quickly. How strong is he? If nothing stops him. After a while, they were walking through the jungle, and MC was looking around. He said how beautiful it is everywhere. Why is it not like this only on his earth? He stepped in the water and said, he should have taken his boots. "Mr. Lohan, is he okay?" He turned around and screamed in fear. "A monster?" Lohan quickly grabbed him by the jacket and pulled him along. He let go of Changsu and said, "It's right behind him. He needs to be careful." He thought, no one is more dangerous than him. Is this really a monster? It looks more like a plant. Changsu grabbed his sickle and said, "It's okay, Mr. Lohan. This is his block now." The system window reported the decapitation skill can be activated. He asked to rely on him. MC quickly swung the sickle, and the system window reported the Blessing of Abundance skill is activated. After a while, the sun came out in the jungle, and Sujin looked around and said, "A nightmare. She's all wet again. It's the same thing every time, and there's nothing to be done." MC saw her and shouted, "Sujin." She smiled and waved at him. Sujin froze, puzzled, and asked, "A customer?" She saw Lohan next to him and wondered what kind of sight this was. Sujina came running up to them, and Changsu was glad to see her. He stood up and said, they were planning to seize the neighboring blocks. Didn't she remember that? He thought he'd meet them and do everything right away. Sujina started shouting in irritation, saying that wasn't the case. After that, she whispered in his ear that something was wrong. Why was he with him? Changsu remembered how it had been while Lohan continued to sort out what was happening and ignored them. Changsu remembered that some time ago, Lohan had made another strong swing, and the protagonist had said that was it. Had he waited long? Lohan silently looked ahead and muttered, "Apples." Changsu looked at him questioningly, and Lohan asked again. He wondered what the apples here tasted like. Changsu waved his hand and smiled, saying there was no room to plant trees here. There were only puddles all around. Lohan grew angry and swung his sword at him, then struck the ground so hard that it shattered, creating a whole path. Changsu clutched his chest in fear and realized that it had been too abrupt. He lowered himself to the conjured flower, thanks to the abundance blessing skill he had activated, and said in a trembling voice that it seemed they would see each other often from now on, so he didn't have to speak so formally. Changsu scratched his head and said, "What happened?" Sujina asked with irritation. What did this mean? She didn't understand anything at all. When she approached the tree, she looked up and asked, "Is this the same apple tree?" She covered her nose with her hands and remarked that the smell was strange, a little unpleasant. Changsu asked again, "It's not very good, is it?" It seems the apple's flavor and aroma have doubled due to the different environment. He's currently experimenting, changing the energy application point, and the flavor is changing. Does she want to try it? He handed her a red apple, emitting that same awful aroma, and Sujina, feeling nauseous, replied that she'd rather not. When she looked away, she said, "So this is the ostrich butt herb he was talking about." Changsu asked again, shouting loudly, "Is that what it's called?" This ostrich butt monster is only active at night, and it's known to be very difficult to catch. She approached the monster and picked up a special flask into which she placed the monster's liquid, saying it was in excellent condition. "Why is that?" She examined the liquid again and asked, "Changsu, did he get this himself?" He replied, "Yes, but what is it?" She asked again. "Lohan didn't catch anything?" Changsu confidently replied, "No, but is something wrong?" At that moment, she grabbed his hand and screamed, "He's gonna sell it, right?" She's no expert, but she knows one thing for sure. It's expensive. She continued shaking his hand, and Changsu shouted that he'd sell it, coaxing her. When Sujina let go, he looked at his hand questioningly and asked himself, "She didn't break it, did she?" Sujina stretched out her hands and rejoiced at what was happening, then turned to the protagonist and thought about how he was a master of both combat and agriculture, and he also kept a sword master close to him. Even at their very first meeting, she realized he was an unusual person. How good it was that they finally met. Sujina pressed her palms to herself and said something about apples, and then about carnivorous plant juice and other crops. At that moment, he called her name several times, and she became very embarrassed, causing her to scream. Yes, what did he want? He replied, an order. And they also needed to grow insect-repellent plants and build a house to stay in. Sujina screamed. She'll give it all, just a second. She reached into her bag, and Changsu looked at her questioningly. When she pulled out several bags, she said the seeds were ready, and this was a construction kit. Changsu smiled and said that was excellent. Now let her wait a little. He rolled up his sleeves, and after a while, they had a temporary home for the adventurers. It was wooden and beautifully constructed. They planted plants around the house to repel insects, chrysanthemums, peppermint, and creeping mint. Sujina, passing through these plants, thought that the creation was understandable. It was a kit, after all. But to be able to grow plants in a matter of seconds was astonishing. What was he even doing? She stood nearby, looking at his back in bewilderment. Changsu noticed this, and, turning around, was dumbfounded. The temple was still old and dilapidated, but today was a special day. The system asked if he wanted to purchase the block's ownership rights. A moment later, the system reported that Block 36, 10th floor, was now his. Changsu was overjoyed, saying that he finally had 100 block rights. He could only buy 10 a day, so it had taken him 10 days, but now he was the owner of this land. He had bought it all himself with his own money. Changsu sank to the floor and began petting his animals. Typically, one block consists of 100 plots of land. If someone occupies them all, their faction gains full ownership of the block. In real life, he struggles to find even a single room, so how good it feels now. Furthermore, the purchase unlocked many new features. But the most important, it seems, is the ability to give blocks special properties. The system reported advice. The characteristics that can be assigned to a block depend on the deity the apostle serves, or the properties of the block itself. Changsu thought that, judging by the prompts, this was a suitable stat for the goddess. The system asked him to choose which stat to assign to him to the block. For example, growth and death. Changsu smiled and thought that everything was happening as expected from their goddess. They couldn't let their guard down for a moment. He thought that growth was better than death, right? This could help their goddess's growth. The system announced that growth properties would be applied to Block 36N10E. Moments later, Changsu looked around and wondered if the grass had gotten a little greener. Otherwise, nothing much had changed. Perhaps it was because this was only the first level. There was an improvement system, after all. At that moment, he spoke up. System status window, which listed the effects of plant and animal growth, skill development, flora and fauna growth, the growth of emerging monsters, and skill development. Changsu was dumbfounded by what he heard and shouted, "Growth of emerging monsters?" He was incredibly frightened and realized that there was good news and bad news. The bad news is that the growth effect has already been applied to the immortals. The good news is that they're not having any problems catching them yet. With the growth, the points he received also increased. He wiped the sweat from his face from fatigue and turned to see a man approaching with a sword in his hand. It was Lohan, and Changsu asked when he had arrived. He replied that he had just approached him. Changsu asked again, had they switched to informal address? He replied that it was still a bit unusual, and Changsu continued by saying that, by the way, the first time he came, did he pick all the apples? Lohan replied, not quite. Changsu wondered, it hadn't even been a week since he bought the second portion. Was he going to eat them all and die? But how many did he need today? Lohan replied that he needed 120. If he could buy more, that would be better. Changsu replied that due to the characteristics of the block, he would need to adjust the flavor a little. Nothing to worry about here? The apple's flavor had changed slightly. The tasting would be free. Lohan confirmed these words, and they set off. It was a calm and peaceful day. They had a picnic. They seemed to be having a great time, given the tranquility, but would they be able to maintain their joy when the events to come? The protagonist watched his pets from afar, when he suddenly turned and asked, "Goddess, why are they gathered here? Something is fishy here." Lohan silently looked away, observing what was happening, and the pet asked, "Could it really be a butcher?" At that moment, Lohan drew his sword and showed it to the chick, who was frightened. Lohan remarked that he was lucky, as these were unusual minions. Changsu was dumbfounded and shouted at him to wait, but Lohan had already swung his sword at the pets, and Changsu managed to protect them and shield them with his body. He fell to the ground and saw many apples falling from the tree. Changsu realized that this was how he was collecting apples and could have at least warned him about it. It seemed no one had noticed the goddess's presence since she'd been dubbed a servant. Lohan, who was catching apples, said he'd been hesitant at first, but then tried swinging his sword and understood everything. This block has grown, hasn't it? He wants to live here while he trains and pays the money. Changsu turned around and asked, "What's he talking about money? But how much?" Lohan replied that it would be a huge amount of one per month, causing Changsu and his pets to gape in shock. They shook hands and Changsu looked forward to the bounty, expressing his agreement with his dear client. After a while, he reflected on how, compared to this, his apple expenses would be mere pennies. That would be enough for several months' rent in advance. Lohan asked, so they had an agreement? He replied, of course, yes. Well, since we were talking about training a swordmaster himself, there wouldn't be anything like the earth splitting in two or the sky splitting in half? He replied, no. And Changsu asked, and there wouldn't be anything flying and crashing everywhere? Lohan confirmed that there wouldn't be any of that either. After that, Changsu said he took it. He wouldn't be bringing any monsters with him. He was apologizing to him, since he was already running low on points. Lohan replied that he didn't need to do that. He should just give him a corner where he could be alone. Changsu, surprised, asked, will that be enough? Lohan confirmed, yes, after which Changsu replied, fine, but to be honest, he had another request unrelated to money. He'd like to ask Master Lohan for protection. Territorial warfare is the essence of this world. No one knows when the next war will break out. If one of the strongest people in this world, Master Lohan himself, agreed to guard them, it would be a huge help. The sum was certainly not small, but he needed to return to his homeland. Lohan approached him and said that if he could enhance the effect of the installations, he'd think about it. Changsu confidently replied that he would give 50,000 points for strengthening and 10 apples each day. Lohan asked again if the apples could be purchased separately. He answered, of course, and then wondered to himself, how many apples does he eat per day? At that moment, his pets glowed with a dark aura, and Ari asked what he was muttering. The pig replied, it seems he's saying he'll now live with this man. Changsu understood and was glad that the swordmaster himself was protecting them, and the goddess would certainly be pleased. When he turned to his pets, he asked why they were so shy. He extended his hand to greet them and asked permission to introduce their familiars. But first, let them greet the guests. The pets were perplexed and didn't know what to do. They were terrified of Lohan, who was looking at them with the same eerie gaze. A moment later, they burst into tears and fled the clearing in fear. Changsu looked at his new friend in bewilderment and suggested that they seemed a little shy. Lohan felt a little ashamed and didn't respond. At that moment, Changsu said, by the way, he had his first assignment for him. The system reported block of carnivorous plants. The protagonist stepped on this soil, and they ended up there with Lohan. He turned to look at him and realized he was reaching for the apples again. This block will also become abundance land, and if he could buy the remaining rights to it, that would be great. He did just that and acquired the block for himself, after which Lohan abruptly drew his sword and tensed. Changsu turned to him and asked, what is it? He replied that there was something there. Changsu asked again, what is it? Where? Lohan looked into the bushes silently, and Changsu's mouth dropped open in shock as he looked there too. There was a small black cat lying on its back and smiling. He thought about it, but there weren't any other animals here. It was probably a monster like a Hemdoll. It didn't look dangerous. Lohan asked it to wait, but Changsu immediately lowered himself to the cat and began petting it, saying, it's surprisingly calm and cute, isn't it? Lohan was stunned and didn't answer, when suddenly the cute cat opened its eyes and began hissing loudly at the protagonist, revealing its sharp fangs. Changsu backed away in fright, and dark magic formed around the cat. His heart nearly stopped from fright, and he hid behind Lohan, who remained silent. Changsu asked, what the hell is this? The system reported that the Apostle of Vice has declared war on this block. Changsu wondered, what? Did this happen because he just lightly petted the cat? Tears of grief welled up in his eyes, and he asked Lohan if this cat really was the Apostle of Vice. Lohan told him not to talk such nonsense, and Changsu replied that he had declared war. It seemed he was simply angry that he'd touched him without permission, but he still wondered, why war right away? So now they'd have to fight this cat to the death? Lohan turned away and replied, no, not him. Since war has already been declared, they'll soon appear at the border. People, of course. Changsu asked again, real people? He thought that he could fight monsters, but he couldn't kill a person. Lohan immediately replied that he could do anything. At that moment, Changsu asked, what? He replied that with vices, you can kill. Changsu was stunned and couldn't answer, when Lohan suddenly added that they would still be resurrected. The protagonist, confused, asked again, what does that mean? They will end up at save points, right? Lohan answered, yes, and there was silence between them. Changsu mentally wondered, will they be resurrected? But that wasn't fair. Some die once and for all, while others can go under the sword 100 times? Changsu gritted his teeth in anger and asked himself, if they can be resurrected, then they can say whatever they want, right? Fine, they'll see who wins. He was consumed by a desire for revenge and asked Lohan if he would help him in battle if needed. He replied, if needed. They rushed forward into battle, and moments later, monsters emerged from a magical portal that had appeared in the forest. They were skeletons in rags, approaching them along with a crowd of people. One of the guys, the team leader, held a loudspeaker to his mouth and shouted, the Imperial Apple Grower must show himself to them right now. Sometime later, in the main alchemy branch, Sujina sat down on the sofa and said, but he said so himself. She remembered her conversation with Lohan and said that she simply didn't quite understand how strong he really was. They watched Changsu together and Lohan replied, it's exceptional. Exceptional is an amazing word. Changsu himself admitted that the swordmaster managed to be equally skilled in both fencing and farming. He looked no more than 30 years old, but his mastery of various skills was simply off the charts. Unless he arrived through a second or third great summoning and was rejuvenated. Otherwise, she couldn't explain it. This is already the 5th time. So what is this artifact? An artifact created by a god or from the remains of a deceased deity. This allows the owner to harness the power of that god. But isn't even an artifact difficult to wield if it's not meant for him? She had a multitude of questions, and leaning back on the sofa, she asked, who knows what awaits them? He wouldn't suddenly say he'd come back to life, but before she could finish her sentence, a bright flash of light erupted near her, and a moment later, Unku appeared amid the thick dust, clutching his head and looking alarmed. He turned to look at Sujina, who was wondering what that was. Had he just looked at her? Why was he coming here? Unku approached her and showed her a flask of liquid. She backed away, wondering if this was the ostrich juice she'd brought. He started screaming. Where did she get this? Sujina didn't know what to say and began sobbing loudly, trying to speak in a trembling voice, wondering what was going on here again. As the monsters began to make their way through the forest, Changsu and Lohan watched from the sidelines, hidden behind some bushes. Changsu asked in surprise, is this supposed to be reconnaissance? Lohan continued eating his apples and replied that he didn't know. Changsu wondered what would happen if civilization grew and they died. Was it worth it? Suddenly, they heard someone shout, the owner of the imperial apples must show himself. The boys were surprised, and at that moment, the reconnaissance party fell into a slippery slime. The leader asked why this particular flooded unit. He picked up the loudspeaker again and announced that he suggested they stop fooling around and get out quickly, okay? Changsu couldn't understand why they were so careless. Maybe they were attacking mindlessly because they would resurrect anyway? Lohan had almost finished his apple and replied that it was quite possible. Their information was woefully limited, but Changsu didn't care. After all, he had Lohan, who could help. Even if something goes wrong, everything will be alright, right? He only believes in the master swordsman. After these thoughts, he smiled and left the forest to scout. The boy noticed his arrival and asked who this guy was. Was he alone? He even had a sickle in his hands. He asked if he was the boss here. He suggests they waste no time and let him give him the apples. Changsu clutched the sickle in his hand and looked menacingly at his opponents. The boy asked again, can he see how many of them there are? What can he do to them with that rusty sickle? He knew he wouldn't summon any more undead, and they had nothing. The boy continued to shout that they were evil spirits and would torture him to death. Changsu chuckled and replied that he'd expected a powerful faction, but they were just a bunch of bandits without a plan. The boys were dumbfounded by this, and Changsu thought the evil spirits were far away, but the swordmaster was right behind him. The boy became very angry and shouted that this was his last chance and that he should bring them the imperial apple right into his hands. Changsu replied that if he wanted to eat, he should go to the store. Why was he causing a scene in someone else's domain? The boy grew even more angry and, frowning, shouted, is he so sure he can get rid of them? Changsu replied that he had many questions, and if he expected him to answer them all, he should go to his mother. At that moment, he realized what he had just said and apologized, saying that it was unlikely she was even in this world. All the guys were stunned by what they heard and didn't even know how to react. In their opinion, this rudeness was too much. They had only slightly intruded on his territory, and he was behaving like this. Changsu realized how he had behaved and looked questioningly at his opponents, who stood there in bewilderment. He started shouting, stop. These are different worlds. Of course she's not in this world. He meant it. The guy flushed with anger and shouted at the others to finish him off right now, while Changsu continued shouting, no, seriously, he didn't mean it like that. After a while, Yunku turned to Sujina and asked her to tell him one thing. Was that liquid in the vial collected by Lohan? She answered fearfully, no, it wasn't him. He asked again, so it was another master? Sujina begged him to stop getting so close, and Yunku, moving forward, said that he understood that client information was confidential and apologized to her. He was probably asking questions for nothing because of the extra pay for the staff. So she wouldn't be getting any extra payment? She asked again. Probably not, he replied. Thank God, it was impossible to continue deliveries at that price for the master's labor. He knew he absolutely couldn't let this opportunity slip. As she knew, the sap of the ostrich plant spoils quickly and is difficult to maintain its purity. Even collecting it is difficult, and the sap she brought was of a higher purity than usual. He didn't know what secrets she had, but would she be able to make regular deliveries? He handed her the tablet with the signature, and looking at it, Sujina said she needed to ask and clarify more, but they probably agreed. Yunku said, then let her at least sign the contract first, and also, let her convey that payments are always welcome. With these words, he winked at her. Meanwhile, the protagonist was in a terrible situation, surrounded by numerous monsters with sharp spears who were already attacking him. He scratched his head and silently looked around, while his enemy grew angry and shouted, exterminate those who laugh at this and cause pain. Changsu said, no, that's not what he thinks at all. It seems he has nothing to discuss with them, and will have to resort to force. But his opponent, meanwhile, was furious that they weren't even trying. Why were they so confident? The protagonist noted that these skeletons skeletons seemed to have rolled off the same assembly line. They attacked him in the same manner, and at that moment, the system reported that mass decapitation had been activated. He destroyed several monsters at once with one blow. A moment later, he snapped his finger and said, "Excellent for one blow." At that moment, the guy blushed and asked, "What the hell is this?" He watched as the skeleton skulls shattered right above him and gaped in shock. When all his monsters fell to the ground, the guy became confused and asked in a trembling voice, "What is this?" Changsu replied that they were weaker than they seemed, perhaps because they were just bones. So is he giving up now? Changsu smiled and stomped on one of his skeletons. The boy screamed that they were useless creatures, then admitted that he didn't think he'd have to drag him too. At that moment, a bright pendant glowed in his hand, which he tried to rip from his neck. He shouted to consider it an honor and go to Hercules. At that moment, he summoned a special creature, causing a bright magical seal to appear on the ground. The protagonist backed away, and the boy told him to look at his Hercules. Changsu watched in surprise as Hercules appeared and began making loud noises. He decided that he should also consider the owner's opinion here. Otherwise, he might sue him for slander, and then he wouldn't be able to get out of it. The boy shouted not to desecrate his masterpiece. It was absolute perfection, worth 30 million gold and 100,000 points. Let Hercules tear him to shreds. At that moment, Hercules approached the protagonist and was about to pounce, while Changsu calmly thought about how interesting 30 million gold coins and 100,000 points were. Was that roughly 200 imperial apples on his account? At that moment, Hercules approached and began to attack, forcing Changsu to retreat. Hercules screamed loudly and smashed everything around him, including the forest itself. When Changsu stopped, Hercules was right above him, getting closer. Changsu grinned and said that he was so kind to come to them. A moment later, he destroyed Hercules with the same single swing of his sword and slit his throat. He was confident in his actions. And a moment later, Hercules fell to the ground. His opponent, surprised, said that this simply couldn't be happening. His Hercules was destroyed. It was 10 years of his work. All the bones of this Hercules began to dissolve into thin air, and when the guy turned to his companion, he asked why she was sitting idly by and what she was waiting for. This girl was an apostle of evil named Soyo. She smirked and said that he had come out so confidently, but where was his courage now? Okay, that was for an extra fee, he knows. She was only supposed to show him the way. At that moment, Changsu asked again, "Is that it? The end?" At that moment, he saw the girl and said that he thought she would remain standing behind him. Soyo stepped out onto the battlefield and confidently looked ahead, when suddenly a bright magical red light lit up her eyes. Changsu tensed and became frightened, and the system reported a hint. The enemy was using the Curse of Life skill, inflicting a discharge on the target. Soyo continued to use her skill, and her friend mockingly said that this meant he would appear again in the future. The system reported a danger notification. At that moment, the protagonist collapsed to the ground, fell to his knees, and began to tremble. He tried to hold on, but a dark aura continued to spread around him. The boy exclaimed with joy. So that's what it was. He needed to take a closer look before attacking. This was the last time he touched the evil spirit. Changsu was in a state of shock and couldn't move. Soyo turned around and said that it seemed he had forgotten why he came here. He should move faster. The boy cursed because of this and asked her to wait at least a little, because he wants to avenge Hercules. After these words, he ran into the forest. As he ran, he thought about how he could faintly smell the apples and that they were definitely somewhere around here. Finding them was only a matter of time. Suddenly, he sensed something was wrong and stopped. Looking around, Lohan appeared behind him, holding a sword in his hand. The boy turned sharply and shouted, "Who's there? Was there really someone else hiding there?" Lohan moved quickly behind the bushes, and the boy didn't understand where he had gone. A moment later, Lohan ran straight at the boy, causing him to gape in shock. In his eyes were the outlines of Lohan attacking him, and he realized, the guy with the red hair, this simply couldn't be. He realized who it was, and a moment later, Lohan slit his throat and he was destroyed. Changsu found himself sitting in the middle of skyscrapers on a city street, perplexed by the passing pedestrians. He grabbed his hair and said that his head hurt badly. He didn't understand what had happened. He clearly remembered fighting the evil spirits. He touched the asphalt and realized that this was Earth. Had something like this really happened to him? This was completely different from the Earth he knew. Even the children here were completely different. At that moment, he heard someone calling his name. It was his parents who asked where he'd been. They were worried about him, their son. Changsu was in a strange state and was stunned when he saw his parents and said in a trembling voice, "Mom and Dad." He immediately ran back to them and hugged them all. Tears welled up in his eyes and he was happier than ever. He sobbed and said how much he missed them. Where had they been all this time? They won't disappear again, right? At that moment, his mother pushed him away with her hand, and he asked, "What's going on? Where were they going?" He began shaking violently and begged them not to leave, but his parents turned and walked the other way. He shouted at them not to go away and not to abandon him again, and stretched out his hands to them. Just as he was about to burst into tears, Lohan grabbed him by the shoulders and told him it was all that woman's game, and he should calm down. Changsu didn't understand what was happening and stared ahead in bewilderment, recalling the moment that had just happened. Lohan turned around abruptly and wondered how the swordsman had gotten here. Soyo landed next to him and clutched her trembling shoulder. The protagonist ran up to her with a sickle in his hands, shaking and sobbing, and looked at her angrily. At that moment, Lohan abruptly kicked off and protected Changsu, deciding to attack Soyo, who was frightened and shouted at him to wait. Changsu frowned and closed his eyes in fear, and a moment later, Soyo found herself in the swamp. Then Lohan asked, shouldn't he have gone after her? Changsu wiped the tears from his face and replied, no, after which he thanked Lohan. He then asked, will they return first? They would deal with the consequences later. What were their plans next? They would become the strongest group in the world and to start capture all the neighboring blocks. Could he count on Lohan's help going forward? He replied that he would accept the bonus in apples. Changsu thanked him for this and said that he should tell him when needed. He would do everything. He would provide him with a full supply. Sometime later, evening fell, and when Changsu and Lohan approached the path, they saw a cat there. Changsu was surprised, suddenly saying that he had completely forgotten what was wrong with this cat. Who even is it? Lohan said that it was one of the 7 plagues, a territorial devourer. The cat looked incredibly cute, licking leaves while lying on the ground. This caused Changsu and Lohan to freeze, and the protagonist dropped the sickle from his hand. He was dumbfounded and asked again, what? A disaster? Meanwhile, their opponent was already in a prison cell, and the system announced that he had lost the war, and the amount of reparations would be determined based on the outcome of the battle. The power gap between the threads was enormous, so a surcharge was being applied. He must pay 1 billion gold coins. He shook with anger and shouted that this couldn't be true. What power gap? The swordmaster was there. The system replied that the defendant was insolvent and the reparations were being demanded by evil spirits. He glanced weakly at the system and asked, what? No, he would pay, no matter what. He would settle the score, and threw the system aside in anger. Suddenly, he felt a strange aura behind him, and saw skeletal monsters approaching, looking at him with sharp, bright eyes. He became afraid, and suddenly these skeletons pulled him out of the cage. The boy screamed for him to let go. Why weren't they letting him go? At that moment, a girl in heels came up to him and said that if he was pressuring her, he should do it the mature way. What kind of nonsense was this? The guy got angry and shouted, what is she doing here? It was Tanha, the apostle of the undead, who said that he better explain what happened here properly, unless he wanted to experience torment worse than death, of course. The guy said, imperial apples. He found an imperial apple plantation. Tana asked again, he's not going to lie just to get out of trouble? He shouted that it was true. Lohan, the one obsessed with imperial apples, was there. Tana replied that if the swordmaster had fought together, the reparations wouldn't have been so high. He shouted back that it was true. His student defeated the undead, apparently, and that's why what happened to Soyo happened. Tana asked in surprise, was Soyo there too? She was probably a mercenary, like a guide or something. The boy asked again, what? Why was she approaching him? Let her not do that. Tana replied that she was sorry she had no one to hold accountable for all this, but at least he would experience the pain of death, and that made her happy. With these words, she smiled at her subordinate and raised her hand to him, saying she had a great idea. The two of them would clearly not be enough for farming. The system reported that the evil spirits demanded negotiations, and he would take them all, and that would be their retribution. While negotiations were ongoing, the losers would remain captive. Yun-Yuk became frightened and shouted, what's going on? No outsiders would be allowed onto the imperial apple plantations. And she asked again, but isn't he curious about what it would be like to turn a person into an evil spirit? If he didn't want to experience it himself, then he should get there by any means necessary. Meanwhile, when Changsu was near the cat, which had really scared him, he hid behind Lohan and asked, is everything all right? Lohan calmly replied that everything would be fine. If it had wanted to attack, something would have happened already. Changsu asked, what if it suddenly changed its mind and decided to attack? Lohan replied that then it would simply eat the right of possession. Changsu exclaimed in fear, what? How could you even eat the right of possession? Is that even possible? He shook with fear and reached his finger toward the system, glad that the cat hadn't eaten it yet. He sighed with relief and said that it seemed his possession wasn't interested in this, so why did the cat come? Lohan chewed the apple again and replied that it happened because the cat wanted catnip. Changsu muttered, but it's not really a cat. Wait, has it really shrunk? Is this really what he thinks it is? He reached out to the plant and using magic, cast the abundance blessing spell. A moment later, beautiful daisies bloomed on the plants, and the cat looked at them in admiration. After this, Changsu squatted down and the cat began sniffing him, coming closer and closer. Suddenly, Changsu noticed a dark aura around the cat and wondered if it really wanted him to pet it. It wasn't like a hamdoll at all, big and smooth, but it was too early for him to relax. It was the embodiment of disaster, and certainly had a creepy appearance. At that moment, he turned to the cat and said that if it protected this block, he would give it as much catnip as it wanted. Did he like that plan? The cat meowed in agreement, and Changsu turned around and said that it looked like they would have to live together now. What would they call it? Lohan replied that Territorial Devourer was too strong a name, so they would shorten the cat to Youngshik. When the cat heard this, he became very angry and showed his sinister fangs. Changsu grinned and asked, "Maybe it'll be Sky?" The cat lay calmly on the ground, and the protagonist wondered if this was what he wanted him to explain. This cat really was more humane than most people. Changsu decided to explain the situation by saying that the cat's fur resembled the starry sky, and that a wise moon lurked in its eyes. "Does he like it?" The cat purred in approval, and Changsu assumed everything had ended well, right? Lohan was upset and replied, "Yes," but he didn't understand what was wrong with his first nickname. Changsu turned and asked, "So he was serious?" They simply misunderstood. A moment later, the system reported that they had won the war and were entitled to compensation, 10 billion, as trophies. Changsu was dumbfounded by what he heard and repeated the number. The protagonist turned to Changsu and announced that they had been awarded compensation of 10 billion. The system continued to explain that the losing side requires negotiations, and until the negotiations are completed, the loser is considered a prisoner. He asked, "What happened to his money?" "Let them give it to him." Sometime later, the protagonist arrived at the mansion and settled in with his pets. He told the goddess that when he was first sent here, he felt scared and lonely, but now he's so happy with them all. That afternoon he saw his parents, even if it was just an illusion from the curse, but he was still happy. He must have truly missed them and decided they would definitely make abundance the greatest power in the world, and he wanted to help them regain their true form. At that moment, he burst into tears, and the goddess touched his hands and burst into tears too. The next day, the protagonist asked Lohan in bewilderment, "Is he serious? But how could he have eaten so many apples?" Lohan continued eating one apple after another, and Changsu asked, "Does he even know what proteins, fats, and carbohydrates are? A person needs a balanced diet." He wasn't even taking his food away from him. Lohan angrily turned around and continued chewing his apple, clutching it to his chest. Changsu sighed with relief and said, "There was so much delicious food here, and he ate nothing but apples." This angered him greatly, and he clutched his head, saying that all he ate was apples. Suddenly, Lohan handed him a piece of the apple and told him to help himself. "Just let him have one piece." Changsu asked in surprise, "And he won't give him another piece?" But he was the one who grew these apples. Well, who was he trying to convince? A swordmaster. He thought he could take care of himself. With these thoughts, he left the table and approached his pets, asking if they had even eaten. They lay contentedly on the ground, rolling from side to side. Some of them were simply asleep and motionless. Changsu asked, "Was it delicious?" And the goddess ate, right? At that moment, all his pets were stunned by what they saw, and Changsu realized the main thing was not to reveal Lohan's true identity, and he hoped she would forgive a little familiarity. At that moment, the ginseng goddess was stunned by what she heard, and Ari ran out to protect her, shouting, "How can he even address a goddess? He earned points, so he was allowed to do anything? He was completely out of control." They began to scold him, and he thought about having to justify himself to Lohan, who was calmly reacting to what was happening and was made of 100% high-grade imperial apple. At that moment, Doji asked Ari to wait and suggested that maybe the apostle was acting like this on purpose. Ari asked again, "Points? Where did he get them from?" Doji replied, "What a fool. This one doesn't even know who the goddess is, but usually the apostle speaks to her formally. He's confused himself, isn't he?" At that moment, Ari got angry and threw himself straight into the pig's belly. Ari ominously said that if he grunted like that mockingly again, he'd be in trouble. Doji got scared and said he wanted an apple, and at that moment they exchanged questioning glances. Ari laid him on the ground and said, "Will he let go and they'll talk like gentlemen?" At that moment, Doji took off his glasses and said, "Light of apples." At that moment, Ari ruined the glasses by smashing them on the ground in anger. When Changsu turned around, he asked, "Well, is it time for them to leave?" The goddess watched him with tears in her eyes, and the protagonist announced that Sujina would be arriving soon. "Let them watch the house." At that moment, he watched the goddess sobbing and waving her paws. He didn't tell her about the war, afraid she'd forbid him to leave. She already knew, didn't she? The skull should have delivered the message by now. He'd be back soon. He stroked the goddess's head and leaned closer to her, causing Lohan to notice what was happening and say he had something he wanted to say. Changsu was surprised and rose to his feet, asking again, "What?" Lohan turned away abruptly and replied, "Time flows differently in every world. Even this place has its own rhythm, different from Earth's, so he shouldn't rush." Changsu blushed and thanked him, saying, "As always, is it really time for them to go now?" At that moment, he turned and looked at the upset pets who were waving goodbye to him. He turned to Hamdal. "He's going with him now, right?" He hadn't bought this for nothing. He opened his bag, and Hamdal looked at it with admiration. Inside the bag was a special round house for Hamdal. People use this item when they want to be close to their hamster at all times. Now with a hamster carrier, it's possible, anywhere, worry-free. Hamdal immediately fit into this bag, and Changsu asked, "Now should they go?" The three of them set off, deciding it was time to expand their influence. After some time, the protagonist entered the portal through the door and looked around, stunned. He realized that now, even without Lohan in the portal, getting to his destination was no problem, and this was the best door in the world. When he entered the forest, someone asked him if he had arrived, It was Sujina, who wondered if he had really fought the evil spirits. The protagonist noted that they had returned early, and Sujina remarked how fortunate it was that he was safe. Changsu remarked that Lohan had helped him, so it wasn't that hard. He even agreed to temporarily act as his guard. When Sujina saw him, she froze and whispered, "Why are they back together?" Lohan was eating an apple again, his face dissatisfied, and Changsu asked, "Does she mean Lohan?" They decided to live together for now. Sujina clutched her head and said she knew it would come to this. He always surprises her. "And who's that?" Sky was at his feet, petting him. Changsu said he came himself, and that it was Sky. Sujina was stunned and embarrassed by what she saw, and kept saying how smart he was. Then she noticed Hamdal, and was delighted to see him. Changsu replied that he was indeed smart, and wondered if he even realized that if he took over the territory, the mint garden would perish. Sujina remarked that such smart and beautiful monsters were rare. If they could be caught, they would definitely find a buyer, but that would be difficult. Hamdal chased the cat and they played together. She suggested that if they couldn't be caught, they could set up a dungeon behind them. After all, monsters gather inside dungeons. Changsu realized, wow, it turns out this is possible. They currently have 443 regular guests, but he feels like there should be more. Maybe he'll find it useful later. At that moment, he turned to Sujina and mentioned that he was from a different block, so it wouldn't be easy. She asked again, from a different block? But which one? He replied that he didn't know. He came on his own. Sujina asked again, isn't this by any chance a human transformed into a cat? He replied that, according to Lohan Sky, it's a territorial devourer. Sujina was surprised and asked again, is this right? He answered, exactly, and she was surprised that such a thing existed among monsters. Changsu remarked that he wasn't a monster, but one of the 7 disasters. When Hamdal heard this, he was terrified of a cat approaching him. Sujina was delighted and asked, is this the territorial devourer? At that moment she grabbed his hand and screamed, why is one of the 7 disasters here? She tugged at his arm so hard, tears in her eyes, that he became terrified and screamed. She threw him into the bushes, causing him to fall to the ground, screaming in anger. The chronicles said he not only captured territories but also turned entire blocks into wasteland. And why did he even bother coming to them? Changsu, already bruised from the blow, assumed it was because of the catnip. Sujina asked if such a creature really came just for the catnip. He replied that he didn't know all the details, but he had a hunch. Capturing a block requires at least 200,000 points. Blessing a field with catnip is worth less than 10,000. Formally, the difference is 20-fold. But what if the absorption of efficiency is different? If they allow a ratio of 1 to 90, then for Sky, a block is worth 2,000 points. And catnip is a whopping 9,000, so the catnip's value is 3 times higher. He doesn't say anything, but the chosen one has no choice anyway. Sujina asked again, will everything be okay? It would be awkward if she came back one day and everything here was in ruins. He replied that cats were territorial creatures, and maybe he, on the contrary, would protect this block. At that moment, he noticed something was wrong when he suddenly turned around and yelled, no, stop! Sky pounced on poor Hamdal, and Changsu shouted that he wasn't food. Sky had already grabbed Hamdal in his mouth and was looking at his master with a smile. He wanted them to be friends, but something happened between them. Hamdal threw himself into the protagonist's arms, saying that he didn't even want to listen to him. At that moment, Changsu turned to Lohan and asked why he was just watching and standing there. He replied that he was ready to intervene at any moment, and Changsu became angry that Hamdal had almost been eaten. He petted poor Hamdal and asked, is he okay? Sujina asked if he was hurt. He should be more careful until they got used to each other. By the way, she wanted to say something. Changsu turned around and asked if something had happened again. If she was referring to the ostrich grass juice, he'd already seen the message. Sujina said that a swindler had arrived and was claiming to be the owner of the imperial apples. Changsu chuckled and said, that's what they needed, an apple swindler. She shouted, that's right. But he said the apple contained the blessing of abundance, meaning as an apostle of abundance, he had the right to it. At that moment, Changsu was dumbfounded and asked again, what? He'd brought his apple as proof, but it was a pitiful substitute compared to the imperial one. He'd even supposedly entered into a false contract with a separate abundance artifact, so now it could be easily expanded. Sujina looked at her friend's reaction and asked why he'd turned so pale. Changsu was upset and clenched his fist, realizing there was another apostle besides him. Had he really been hiding all this time? And now he'd suddenly shown up and demanded something from him? Was he even a real apostle? He turned to Sujina and said they needed to find him. She asked if they knew each other. Changsu replied no. It was simply that he was the apostle of abundance. At that moment of confession, Sujina was stunned and backed away in surprise, screaming, what did he just say? He replied that they say you can make even the devil work for money, right? Let her announce the reward. They'll give a separate reward for the artifact, and 100 imperial apples for the living swindler. Lohan overheard all this and turned around abruptly, realizing this was his chance. Sometime later, Yunyuk, hooded, walked through a dark alley, musing that to convince Lohan and his disciple, he needed the undead. Without the undead, denial is like a squid without tentacles, a pie without filling. In short, complete nonsense. He might be able to handle the bad undead, but his 5 old ones will only ruin everything. When he entered the room, the gentleman greeted him with a smile and announced who he saw, their impoverished master. Yunyuk replied that he was actually a guest. Enough, let him just give it to him. He held out the document, and the gentleman asked again, "Is this payment?" Yunyuk asked, "Will he take the materials?" At that moment, he pulled out a sharp steel tool, and the man said, "Let him let go of my hand first." Yunyuk asked, "He knows, right, that he bought this from the old man for a pretty penny?" The man replied that he did, and Yunyuk added that he was now selling it for even less than it was worth. He told him not to worry, since he hadn't lost his memory yet. Yunyuk asked him for at least a discount, and he replied that everyone understood that he didn't just make money out of thin air. Yunyuk replied that maybe this was their last time seeing him, and he wanted to give him a little something extra as a favor. His acquaintance replied that he was good at playing on people's sensibilities, then commented on how people were saying he'd gone broke while searching for the Imperial Apple. He hoped it wasn't that ridiculous scammer, and the man replied that wasn't entirely true. Many smart people had fallen for that. Everyone knew that, but this was breaking news, just arrived. Yunyuk asked him to speak faster, and the man informed him that there was a reward for the scammer. He could retrieve 100 Imperial Apples alive, and there was a separate reward for the artifact. Yunyuk smiled and thanked him for the tip. The man replied that if he was grateful, he should come back again. At that moment, Yunyuk realized it was finally happening. He'd found it, the engagement gift. At that moment, Yunyuk suddenly began shouting, "Please let them accept them." They would work tirelessly. The boys knelt down and begged them to accept, while the skeletons behind them laughed at their actions. Changsu was dumbfounded and asked himself, "Are they kidding?" He had no idea what to do and turned to Lohan, who was simply eating an apple and relaxing again. Changsu thought, okay, let him eat more apples, since Yunhyuk's friend said he brought this guy for him. He was asking for his acceptance. They actually brought a guy tied up with ropes, who was extremely angry at having such things done to him. Changsu's mouth dropped open in shock and asked, "Already? Considering the distances and travel restrictions, it seems he grabbed the reward as soon as it was announced. 100 Imperial Apples do have meaning, and he clearly sensed it." The guy screamed and begged to be let go. Changsu used his magical powers and the abundance energy spell. He couldn't say. The guy looked like some kind of swindler. He was still kicking and trying to get out of the ropes. Changsu thought he was just an ordinary guy, and yet he couldn't understand how he managed to cast such spells. The guy called him an idiot and asked if he was going to untie him or what. Did he even understand that this wasn't how things were done? Changsu replied that he didn't know how convincing it was, but he was certainly good at getting on his nerves. The guy shouted that he was bluffing. He couldn't kill him. Since he was an apostle of abundance, he knew perfectly well what its basic skills were. He could still clearly see exactly where he needed to strike, but first, he wanted to check the artifact. The guy started screaming in fear. Was he trying to trick the elder for money? Changsu replied that he kept mumbling and mumbling, just like the elder. Yunhyuk approached him and showed him the wreath, telling him to hold it. Changsu took it in his hands and looked at the artifact in bewilderment. He asked, "So it wasn't the artifact's energy? Does that mean this guy really is his senior?" The guy continued to angrily yell at him to take his hands off the object, saying it belonged to him. He blushed with anger and frowned. Changsu realized that perhaps it was because of such seniors that the goddess Abundance had sunk to this state. He clenched his fist and, putting the wreath on his head, said, "He is a traitor who did not even think of returning to the goddess." Why on earth had he suddenly remembered the Imperial Apples? The guy replied that he was an apostle of abundance and that it was his right, deserved, and legitimate. Changsu replied that he hadn't lifted a finger for this. What right were they talking about? The guy started screaming, and what could he boast about? Everything had grown on the foundation he had laid. Changsu asked again, "He's saying it's all thanks to him?" The boy shouted back, "Yes, the apples, the temple, even the monsters are all thanks to him." After hearing this, Changsu became incredibly angry and clenched his teeth in rage. He mentally asked himself, can you even imagine what he went through in this desolate solitude? How could he say such a thing? Okay, he decided to calm himself down and realized that, no matter how you look at it, one apostle couldn't pull off such a thing. He told the boy he'd stop talking nonsense when he suddenly asked, "Who?" He leaned closer and peered into his eyes, causing the boy to tense up a little and ask, "What is he talking about?" Changsu clarified that he was asking who was behind him. The apostle's job is to protect their god and strengthen his influence. And he abandoned the goddess and ran away? So he trusted someone so desperately. The boy screamed, "There's no one here. He just wanted to survive. That's why he ended up in such a remote place." Changsu swung his sickle and shouted that these were excellent dying words and said goodbye to the boy, which frightened him, and, frowning, yelled for him to wait. When the sickle stopped near his neck, the boy began to shake and screamed that he simply had no choice. Unlike him, he was an ordinary man and had never even swung a scythe. Changsu asked him to stop chatting and let him name those behind him. The boy, with a trembling voice, replied that he knew nothing, and Changsu swung the sickle at him again, causing the boy to shout that he honestly didn't know, that he had simply been promised money for a comfortable life. But he didn't even see the coin. He, too, had become a victim. Changsu replied that he would be of no use. The boy, with tears in his eyes, begged for mercy, as he swore he wouldn't do it again. Changsu replied that it was too late and swung the sickle again, after which he struck the boy. He screamed in pain and fell headfirst to the ground. Changsu thought, honestly, he'd gladly blow his head off. But even though this was a game world, it was hard to imagine killing a real person. At that moment, he looked up at the sky, and the system informed him that the god of injustice was offering him a change of faith. If he accepted the offer and became its apostle, he could kill this man. So what would he do? Changsu asked again. Was this another god? What kind of stalker was this? He hadn't really intended to kill him, as if he were cursed and couldn't finish him off. Changsu turned and asked Lohan what would happen if he killed someone. He sighed, saying that Lohan wasn't an apostle. He heard someone call his name. Yun-hyuk, standing off to the side, explained that the reviving apostles of injustice had an exception, but generally speaking, murder was forbidden. Punishment was commonplace. They could even excommunicate. Changsu realized, so there must have been some basis after all? If he really wanted to, he could have offered it to the prisoner. The system informed him that he was to become an apostle of injustice, and the protagonist abruptly turned away and said, "Of course, this is it again. He's not interested, okay?" The system repeated that by changing his faith, he would gain power incomparable to his current one. This unsettled the protagonist, and he snapped that he didn't need it. The system informed him that the god of injustice was offering a trial month, and Changsu shouted, "No. He already said so. Is this really called faith?" He considered that if he could send a message, he was clearly connected to this world. He turned to the guys and asked, "They wanted him to hire them, right?" Yun-hyuk shouted with a smile on his face, "Yes, and they don't even need a reward." He replied that they would discuss the terms later. They had their first assignment. They were to keep an eye on this traitor. He pointed toward the guy lying on the ground, no longer moving. After some time, the pets in the house woke up, and Ari suddenly began screaming. "What is this?" Changsu brought a wreath of flowers to the goddess, and they realized it was the abundance artifact. He was returning to her what had originally belonged to her. The goddess rose from her seat and looked at Changsu, who suddenly froze and asked, "What is this?" She pushed the gift away, but Changsu smiled and replied that everything was fine, that even without this, it was enough. When he placed the wreath on her, her eyes filled with tears, and an emerald stone appeared in one of the flowers. Changsu was surprised. "What is this?" All the other pets also gaped in astonishment and looked at the goddess in admiration. Moments later, a terrible aroma appeared among them, and Changsu asked, "What is this?" He looked at the goddess, who had transformed into a beautiful girl with green hair, and asked, "Who is she?" Doji realized that the goddess's power had returned, and Changsu realized that it really was her. When the dust cleared, he asked, "Who is she? Could she really be a goddess? Was she truly a goddess?" He rushed toward her and took her hands in his. Looking at her and remembering how he'd found her, Changsu could only wonder if this day had truly arrived. Back then, it seemed like she was about to disappear. The goddess smiled at her hero, and the system announced that the goddess Abundance had appointed Apostle Changsu as the head of the apostles. Now he could command the apostles. He was surprised and asked, "Is that really how it works?" The system reported that Changsu was an Abundance apostle of the 5th generation, the head of the apostles. This was an Abundance apostle of the 4th generation. He could excommunicate this. Changsu realized that there really were only 2 of them. But who should do this? He certainly wasn't going to kill anyone, but he didn't want to live next to a traitor either. At that moment, he pressed the excommunicate button, and the pets started screaming, "What is this idiot doing?" Henshaw was indeed excommunicated, and the system reported that he had been demoted to a common apostle. Changsu was stunned, scratched his head, and asked, "So the title no longer means anything?" The goddess was stunned by what she saw and didn't know how to react. Changsu turned to her and realized she had tried to help him, but it had been awkward. The goddess looked at her hands in surprise, and Changsu apologized, informing her that he couldn't keep a traitor in abundance. He would try to expand this as soon as possible, and she shouldn't worry. The goddess was delighted by these words, and the system reported that the goddess Abundance would grant the apostle a new skill. He could choose the skill of healthy abundance and communication. Changsu asked again, was she really giving a skill too? The goddess was being overly generous today, but now he wanted to see it. Ari, who had been watching the proceedings, was saying that there were only 2 apostles. So who was he excommunicating? "You idiot." Doji asked him to calm down and held him in his arms. Ari continued to be aggressive, saying, "Well, let him at least choose communication, then perhaps there wouldn't be such scandals in the future." Suddenly, Changsu chose the skill of a healthy abundance, and Ari completely froze with irritation. Changsu wondered what this even was. Again, he saw no description or explanation. Maybe it was some kind of passive. He ate something imbued with the blessing of abundance and became healthier. Maybe Lohan would have to do that. He lived on apples alone. At that moment, Ari became upset and said that it was definitely over, as did Doji, who was sitting nearby, and the goddess, who were drooping and discussing it among themselves. Doji remarked that it seemed the apostle wasn't even considering taking over the communication. Changsu turned around in surprise and asked her to wait, turning to the goddess, when he suddenly shouted at her, "Her legs." When she pulled her legs out from under her skirt, the terrible smell and dust reappeared. Everyone covered their noses, and he shouted, Goddess? The goddess turned back into ginseng, and everyone was stunned. She scratched her head and smiled, and Changsu exhaled with a smile on his face. He hoped she was healthy and that abundance would be of some use. Sometime later, the courier delivered the package and left it near the door of the apartment building in the entryway. The mother who took the package was delighted and went into the house, saying that it had finally arrived. And the son answered, "Did she order something again?" It turned out to be the same imperial apple in the box. It contained a letter addressed to the respected victims of counterfeiting. The producer of the imperial apples expresses deep condolences and is sending them one genuine apple as compensation. They should beware of counterfeits. This genuine product is sold only through bargaining. Mother and son were very happy about this, and she said that it was probably no wonder they were so popular and that it smelled very good. The child raised his hands in joy and shouted that he really wanted it too. She didn't understand what was happening to him and, cutting off a piece, handed it to him on a fork and said, "Okay, let him have it, but only one piece, okay? It's better to eat apples in the morning. It's healthier that way." The boy looked at the apple admiringly and immediately took a bite, when suddenly he dropped his fork and shouted to his mother that it was incredibly delicious. She screamed, "What is he talking about? Where did he pick up such nasty words?" He replied in a trembling voice that if she had tried it herself, she would have expressed her admiration the same way. She offered the apple to the cat and said that no matter how delicious it was, such language was unacceptable. But then she bit into it and was silent for a moment, after which she mentally realized the taste was simply incredible and cursed, realizing she should brag about it. A few days later, she wrote on a free forum that she had tried the now fashionable imperial apples. She had hesitated for a long time because of the price, but she didn't regret it. Even without coffee, her eyes opened naturally in the morning, her body felt light and healthy. And most importantly, her husband now gets up every morning as if on cue, and she is simply happy. She received numerous comments, and imperial apples became the most popular product in the world. Regular posts only fueled the excitement. Posting photos of the apple became a trend. But like everything else online, information about apples began to be distorted. Some anonymous users wrote that it actually helps with things that shouldn't be written here. These are more tales about stamina. Last time, a bloody goblin helped with that. Koreans are a people of extremes, as always. This was all the result of a healthy abundance. Hengel, who was watching the proceedings online, said with a grin, "So these are the imperial apples." Sometime later, the protagonist found himself back at home. He lay on his bed, holding a book in his hand, wondering what kind of thing he should launch that would also make noise. All his pets surrounded him on the bed, and he mused that the materials for building the temple were half the problem, but the fact that various groups were watching him was the real problem, so he kept putting it off. But everything is working out quite well. Fortunately, they've agreed with the alchemy and say that the frequency of the ostrich essence has reached 98%. The scientists nearly lost their minds with delight. They've already captured all the blocks around the future temple, and it seems safer with Lohan. The place is almost open anyway. He hopes he's not planning to suddenly disappear. Lohan, who continued eating apples, sat silently and didn't answer. When Changsu turned to the bookshelf, his name was called. He spun around and saw Sujina standing before him, startling him. He asked what happened. She wasn't supposed to come until tomorrow. Sujina bowed to the ground, trying to catch her breath, and replied that it didn't matter. A new rumor about imperial apples had surfaced. Changsu replied that they've already become a cure-all. So what else is there? Sujina asked him not to be alarmed, but now they're credited with increasing stamina. Changsu was dumbfounded by this and asked, "Stamina?" Hamdal, who was sitting on his shoulder, chuckled at what he'd heard. The pets, watching their conversation from afar, wondered, what happened again? What is stamina? They don't eat this? Changsu realized that on this earth, drained of its vitality, this wasn't a trivial matter. People had gone so far as to eat raw snake bile. 23 people had already done so, and some had even died. If the apples didn't work, people might even come at them with fists. And since that was the case, he needed to come up with something. Sujina asked, "Are they really that ineffective?" Quite a few people were noticing improvements in stamina. At that moment, Lohan, who was eating an apple, stood and looked at this conversation questioningly. Changsu replied that those who said so were simply beginning to feel better in general. He hadn't added anything to the apple for stamina. Sujina replied that everything was clear to her, and Changsu asked, maybe, to deflect the blow, they could grow a fruit that would actually help them? Sujina replied that that sounded reasonable. She was ready to promote the product. He knew which fruits really helped. He replied that he wasn't that good at it, when Lohan suddenly replied that it was nuts, carrots, asparagus, and tomatoes. The boys turned to him in bewilderment and continued to stare at Lohan, dumbfounded. He continued that goji berries would also work. Changsu thought he wasn't interested in anything other than apples, but Lohan was a man too. Lohan asked him again, "Why is he looking at me like that?" Changsu replied, "No, nothing. So which fruit is better?" Lohan replied, "Goji berries." Changsu thought for a moment and then said, "Well, is it time to look for workers?" After a while, Yunhyuk, kneeling, greeted the protagonist in a friendly manner and asked if they would finally have work. Changsu replied that they wanted to try growing stamina berries. At that moment, Yunyuk exclaimed that it was a wonderful idea. Chungsu also said that they needed to check if they were even working. He said they would help and take care of everything. The protagonist noted that this was a serious decision. They were just toys, and no one was forcing anyone to do this. At that moment, one of his subordinates raised his hand and asked permission to ask a question. What exactly would they be growing? Chungsu announced that they would start with goji berries, and the man was dumbfounded. He began to beg the protagonist again, please, tears welling up in his eyes, and he shook with terror. He asked for their participation. Chungsu couldn't understand why they were so eager to work. Could they really be serious? After that, Chungsu grinned and replied that since they were so eager to do this, would anyone else want to join in? All the guys raised their hands, ready for this task. Chungsu was very surprised by this and wondered if they shouldn't say they all had this problem. After some time, the main character was at the tree and brought her a whole basket of berries, saying that if she brewed it and drank it, it would supposedly activate. Moreover, the worse the condition, the faster the effect would manifest. Sujina was delighted to see the basket and accepted it with admiration. He took one berry, saying that it would cause a strong reaction within half an hour. She was very surprised and asked, how did he manage to do it so quickly? Chengsu even felt a little awkward, since she was always thinking about business. He breathed a sigh of relief and said that it just happened that they had an expert with an unusual passion for this field. This was a man who, in theory, was supposed to become an apostle of lust or madness. One of the guys who was picking these berries tried a few, and his entire body gained muscle mass, and he shouted with pleasure that it was growing, and could he please make the effect stronger? Chengsu asked if he'd heard that back on Earth. He'd written not a diary, but an entire scientific notebook. This was the first time he'd used the blessing of abundance to enhance a specific function, and thanks to him, it had happened quickly. It seemed many new species would be appearing for some time. He asked her to check the safety first, and Sujina exclaimed that he could rely on her, as she would turn goji berries into gold. Her eyes sparkled with a new idea, and Chongsu replied that he was counting on her. He watched her leave in bewilderment, wondering what news she'd return with this time. For people to buy this, they had to think with their lower bodies, not their heads. Otherwise, the more they ponder, the more excuses they'll find not to spend. Brewing it yourself is a hassle. Do people really need to bother so much? It makes them look so unsure of themselves, doesn't it? All these thoughts haunted ordinary people. That's why the bottled drink will sell so much better, and the price can be raised for it, since the product has been processed. She was delighted and tried it. Her subordinate asked how she liked it. She replied that it was a mild flavor, slightly sweet, drinkable like water. Let him try it too. The guy was surprised and asked again. What? He didn't need that at all. And Sujina replied, okay, let him try it. It's the product. She shoved the bottle into his mouth, and the guy, startled, began swallowing. After he'd taken a few sips, he said he didn't know the effect, but it tasted pretty good. Sujina grinned and replied, well, of course, then she'd be going. He asked again, was she really leaving already? Sujina wondered, what's wrong? He replied that he'd been thinking, maybe he should go too. Sujina asked him not to worry about her, but when else would she get the chance to visit such a place? Usually, healing properties are confirmed by alchemy, but this time she wasn't heading to an alchemist because there was a more appropriate certification body for stamina-boosting products. She slapped her foot and abruptly headed in the right direction. When she used her magical powers, she found herself right in the sky above the city. This faction is responsible for nightlife. When she landed in the desired location, she looked ahead in surprise and realized that absolutely nothing had changed. Even during the day, it was dark and gloomy here, and the surroundings could make a lonely person feel even more lonely. All these people were their potential customers. The happier they were, the better for sales. The Chastity Temple was right in the center of the street, and Sujina approached the building. When she entered, she was met by a girl who asked how she could help her. She said her name was Sujina, and she was a representative of the Circulation Trading Company. She had come to get certification for a stamina booster. The office worker replied that she understood and should please come to the reception room. To be honest, Sujina wouldn't come here often. It's impossible to get used to this place. She looked around the rooms in surprise and followed the girl, who stopped abruptly and bowing, asked her to wait a bit. When Sujina sat down on the sofa near the office, she thought about how the adult goods market was controlled by a faction called lust or carnal desires. But the reality is that the market has been completely captured by chastity, and those vulgar factions have long since ceased to exist. Meanwhile, the protagonist suddenly became alarmed and shouted, wait a minute, they mentioned chastity? Sujina, who had arrived, replied, yes, and he asked again, is that really true, or has the definition of the word changed? She replied that everything was correct. In short, the most interesting things were yet to come. So the Apostle of Chastity arrived and announced that for the first time in a long time, they had been presented with such a worthy thing, and they were happy to check it out. He presented the certificate and asked that it be preserved and maintained at this concentration. The herbal pill she enclosed was good, but something was missing. Sujina asked, surprised, what was wrong with that? He replied that goji berries were an excellent ingredient, but they needed to be combined with other ingredients, Would they be able to enhance the properties of other ingredients as well as goji berries? How about growing them together and combining them? If finding the formula was difficult, they could simply substitute the ingredients, but in that case, the endurance products would be sold under the Chastity brand. She was free to choose. Sujina looked at the documents and wondered, the rulers of the night market, do they want to be sure they'll lose? After all, if they succeed, a strong competitor will emerge. He replied no, that wasn't the issue. They were always looking for a new, strong stimulus. They simply didn't have enough producers capable of offering the required level, so they had to take matters into their own hands, and the emergence of a capable producer is always a joy for them. When Changsu heard this, he looked at Sujina in shock and shouted, are they really that crazy? How did the people from Chastity even come to this? She replied that the apostles of Chastity are forbidden to enter into that very thing. So they grow stronger by suppressing their desires, but for training, they use even more powerful stimulation. Thus, Chastity took over the night market, and despite being a small faction, it has a strong economic and military base. Changsu questioned himself, but wasn't this just an obsession? Sujina noted that collaborating with Chastity would be good, but before that, manufacturing was also a good option. These are the ingredients they recommend. What does he think of that? She handed him the documents, and Changsu, after reading them, noted black raspberry, daughter seeds, magnolia berries, Sinidia's seeds. He'd never heard of any of these before. Meanwhile, she was playing with Hamdal and not listening to him. Changsu asked, they're going to sell tea from the berries, right? Sujina replied, yes, and they should supply it to all Chastity-owned hotels. Changsu rose from the table and replied for the 100th time, they've achieved their immediate goal, so he proposes gradually developing stamina medications. Sujina continued playing with Hamdal, and suddenly the protagonist heard Doji grunt. She turned to him and said, if this is food, then let him give her this too, Apostle. Ari asked, is it really that delicious? Changsu wondered if they'd just woken up and were suddenly discussing the idea. After all, they had an expert, so they couldn't rush it. He generally thought so, but circumstances always arise suddenly. A man who hadn't experienced release in over 40 years, a chastity legend, came to him. It was the great chastity mage, Hengel. He came to his plot, and Changsu asked, so he feels like he's losing an important function? Hengel noted that this was indeed the case, and Changsu asked, if he loses this, will he be expelled from Chastity? He bowed in agreement, and Changsu asked, what are the chances of reinstatement? Hengel looked very embarrassed and lowered his gaze. Changsu also wondered, confused, if he really had no chance. Initially, Chastity was precisely what one couldn't imagine. A faction that embodied purity, a faction that lived a proper, unblemished life. This faction towered above the mundane world. But the essence of the block world was the struggle for territory. And since Chastity was the weakest faction, their unenviable future was obvious. To purge their purity, they needed strength, and then it dawned on him. Chastity isn't about purity. As long as a person maintains composure, almost anything is possible. Hengel sat down at the table and reported that within a year, he had reached a level where he alone generated half of all chastity points. Changsu asked, so, did God really tolerate all this? He covered Hamdal's ears and asked him not to listen. Hengel noted that at first, of course, he threatened excommunication, but upon seeing his score, God himself approved of his methods. Thus began the great reform of chastity. Changsu wondered if this was some kind of addiction, both sides too corrupted. Hengel remarked that since the spirit of chastity grows stronger, the more worldly desires are suppressed. It could even be said to be similar to weight training. But the skill was so fast that he reached a state in which worldly desire disappeared before it had even had a chance to emerge. But the purpose of chastity is to restrain carnal urges and remain faithful. And if desire disappears, he will simply be stripped of his status. So he grabbed the protagonist's hands and begged him, imploring him that there was hope for him in his goji berries. Changsu asked, how should he help if he's trained for 30 years? He noted that, fortunately, the critical point was still far away. He wasn't dying tomorrow, so he shouldn't worry. He simply asked him to focus on product development. He handed him a special item, and Changsu looked at it in surprise. Hengel informed him that while he was doing research, he would provide financial security. Changsu looked at the envelope and asked, what could he possibly enclose? He was, after all, an apostle of abundance. Lohan, observing the entire situation from the sidelines, suddenly exclaimed, that's the bonus he'd come up with for a successful outcome. Changsu, seeing the incredible sum in the envelope, was stunned. He realized that Hengel was the man who had corrupted even a god with points. It was hard for him to refuse such a reward. Hengel remarked that he was counting on him, and they shook hands. After some time, many people in the Chastity faction discussed the new news. Perhaps they should confide a little here. Today was someone's 30th day, and they were marveling at the new generation of archmages. The girls were discussing whether they should make a different-sized front, and the apostle who passed among these people in a hood, so that no one would notice him, and thought that the abstinent shouldn't be so vulgar. How could they even discuss such things during a sacred trial? The apostle has been an apostle of chastity since the 17th convocation. When he entered the office where several other unknown individuals in cloaks were sitting, he removed his hood and announced his gratitude for their gathering. They would finally be able to exorcise this returnee, but they couldn't just sit and wait. Another apostle, 18, spoke up, saying they needed not just containment but true purity. They would begin a meeting about true chastity. One of them asked again, should they start with reports? He replied, yes. They would first share the information they had gathered. Consumer reviews of Abundance Goji tea were presented on their papers. As they knew, Abundance had released stamina-boosting products. They had tested the effects themselves, and judging by customer reviews, they could make the supplement even stronger. Incidentally, the Great Alchemist hasn't said anything, but rumor has it that the alchemy food department is currently in chaos due to Abundance Goji tea. At that moment, one of the apostles asked, who is Unku covering for? The apostle replied, he heard the apostle was a disciple of Lohan, her close friend. He'd rather take up arms than be a farmer. Maybe they'll offer him a good position? One of the guys said they'd figured out the location of his block, but going there in person was pointless. That pervert would kick them out as soon as he saw them. The apostle thought for a moment and then said that, in that case, they'd do it this way. First, they'd form an alliance with alchemy, bring the apostle Abundance outside, and once he was alone, they'd definitely do what they needed. Meanwhile, the protagonist grabbed his nose and looked ahead questioningly. He hiccuped constantly and wondered if someone was discussing him. Meanwhile, everyone was busy with their work and picking special berries. Changsu apologized to Yoon-hyuk and said he needed to talk to him. He turned around, and Changsu asked him if he could come with him. They walked deep into the forest together, where several mutilated skeletons lay, and suddenly Yoon-hyuk burst into tears and realized it was Hercules. He wrapped his arms around the creature and wept with hope. He spoke in a friendly voice, saying he thought they'd never see him again. Did he leave this for him? Changsu chuckled and replied that it seemed so. He was already worried they'd start rotting. Yoon-hyuk continued to cry, showing his emotions, saying he missed his Hercules. If Changsu had injured Hercules, he would definitely have harbored resentment, but now they could continue living together, so they needed to mend their relationship. By the way, is it okay that he's headless? Yoon-hyuk replied, of course, he'll only be doing physical labor. With Hercules, his work capacity will increase 17-fold, plus he can also shrink. The protagonist thought that was strange. The precise number even inspired confidence. And here are those skeletons lying off to the side. Yoon-hyuk noted that they lacked the skills to control the temporary head, and he didn't know if they would be of any use. Changsu said that no one becomes a master on the first day. They should try again and learn. Yoon-hyuk remarked that he hoped so, because if they were only going to get in his way, then what use was he for them? Changsu, watching him from the side, mused that he had long ago noticed that he was a typical tsundere. In any case, they would enjoy working together. Yoon-hyuk noted that they did too, when suddenly they heard loud shouts and abruptly turned to the side. Hengel ran after one of the guys, yelling at him to listen for a second. The guy replied that the same thing was happening again. Hengel exclaimed that he had already said that he was perfect for chastity. He had finally found a student to whom he could pass on his legacy. The guy ran away from him, shouting that he was going to get married and live happily. Changsu mused that he truly was an expert. At that moment, the guy hid behind Changsu and shouted again that he would be happy with his wife and children. Changsu asked him not to push him like that, and Hengel asked, what about him? He snapped that he would never do that, and that was the point at which they should have given up. The guys ran away from Hengel further into the forest. Hengel said he was too valuable a talent to waste, and Changsu suggested that since they were already meeting, they should test a new potion and try them one by one. He handed him some berries, and Hengel tried one and said it was about 33 points. The second one was about 32. Changsu scratched his head in disappointment and said their goal was 90, so they were still a long way off. Hengel asked him not to be upset, since any other man would have turned into a beast by now. Changsu asked why he could never go past 40. Hengel countered by asking, does he know that the sorcerer's state affects the blessing? Changsu asked, what do you mean? He replied that it means feelings come first, then the decision. For example, he likes forbidden texts like these. Maybe he should try casting a blessing first? Changsu became very angry and imagined blood flowing from his ears. He also covered his Hamdol's ears and asked again, thinking about the forbidden. Hengel became embarrassed and replied that he was only showing this to him, when Changsu suddenly turned around and shouted, thank you, but don't do that. Was he completely crazy? Hengel grabbed his book, thinking he was very careful with it. But if anything happened, he could try it some other time. Changsu became angry and said that he had already told him not to open it. At that moment, Sujina met Hamdol and was delighted when he jumped into her arms. Changsu asked, Miss Sujina, is she here yet? She mentioned she had important news. So what was that? Changsu looked embarrassed as he turned to Hengel and said abruptly, nothing. So what's the big deal? Sujina yelled at him not to fall. Alchemy had requested a dungeon run. He froze and asked, what? What was that? What kind of dungeon was it? And why the hell did this even happen? At that moment, the protagonist froze and asked, what? What kind of nonsense was this? He's just a farmer, right? He only has a rusty sickle and one single skill, decapitation, which can hardly even be called a combat skill. Of course, for some it works flawlessly, and even a thick neck is cut off in no time. But in a dungeon, it would barely leave a scratch. Doesn't he look like a farmer? They sell apples or tea, actually. Something like that. Sujina looked at him with confusion and remarked that, although they were talking about a walkthrough, this was actually a request to extract materials from monsters. Hengel felt uneasy and, clearing his throat, decided he'd better go first. Changsu glanced at the system window and suggested that freshness was key, like with ostrich juice, and what he cut usually didn't spoil for long. So, they needed plant-type monsters? Sujina replied no, it was a higher-order water spirit. Anyone could kill a normal water spirit, so there was little difference. But higher-order ones were different. If you didn't cut off its breath with one blow, it would begin to absorb other spirits and regenerate. This would affect the material's frequency, so they needed someone capable of inflicting devastating damage. A sword master, for example. Changsu wondered if this was a strange conclusion, wasn't it? He turned to Lohan and asked if this wasn't a request for him. He wondered if rumors were spreading that he was already everywhere, so maybe they decided that if they called him, he'd come along too. But he couldn't be away for long, so he'd probably decline. At that moment, he thanked Sujina and said he wouldn't be involved, and she asked with disappointment, would he really refuse? The reward was quite generous, actually. First, they'd provide weapons, and his reward would be a water spirit. At that moment, the protagonist was stunned and asked again, a water spirit? He grabbed Sujina by the shoulders and began shaking in surprise. A water spirit was a farmer's dream, a mobile sprinkler. He knew he really wanted it and cried out, can't he buy it? She replied that in her opinion, it wasn't just the reward. In general, refusing this order wasn't the best idea. The alchemy faction probably wouldn't look kindly on them right now. After all, they said that goji berry tea became a hit among hangover remedies, and hangover remedies were the main products of alchemy. She replied that this was precisely the case, and she thought the order was a pretext to settle a misunderstanding. Was there any other reason to doubt it? Chunsu thought the offer was incredibly lucrative, but frankly, he was worried about his blog. Sujina whispered to the monk that it really was hard to trust outsiders. Maybe they should build a temple first? They'd already obtained building materials through alchemy, and temples had a defensive function. Lohan listened silently to their conversation and was stunned when Changsu shouted, is that really how it works? She replied that it wasn't for nothing that he was considered a strategic asset. A few days later, the goddess was upset. Lately, she'd been overwhelmed by too many worries. The protagonist was friends with a swordsman and was already capturing neighboring blocks. He and the apostle had fallen out, and he'd even excommunicated one, and they were pestering them with no business ethics whatsoever. But it was good that he felt so calm lately. The apostle focused on his inner development, the temple was completed, and now the apostle could acquire the communication skill, and everything would be perfect. But the goddess continued to sit sadly outside while the other pets watched her. The system reported that the last line skill was being activated in the temple, and at that moment, all the pets were dumbfounded by what they saw. It was a military level skill. At that moment, Lohan swung his sword to break through the protective barrier, and the protagonist asked, is it really that powerful? It was Lohan who withstood the attack. The pets wondered if the apostle was up to something again. They were terrified. At that moment, Sujina approached him and asked, well, are they leaving? She would lead them to the right block. At that moment, Changsu realized he had forgotten to inform the goddess of what was happening, and Sujina shouted at him to quickly follow her. He realized they would only be gone for a short while. Nothing terrible would happen, right? Sometime later, the protagonist and Lohan were in the alchemy headquarters. Sujina announced that they had already arrived, and Changsu noted that it was good that they had already set up the entrance gate on the way back. This was human territory. Sujina noted that, given the points, this was, of course, unthinkable. If you pay more points, you can exceed the purchase limit for the right of ownership and purchase additional plots. The price, however, was growing exponentially, so he couldn't buy everything outright. Sujina waved and said that in that case, she was leaving and wished them good luck. Changsu thanked her and wished them a safe journey. When the boys entered the building, they were greeted by a girl who asked, he's Mr. Changsu, right? They were waiting for him. They had prepared the weapons he had chosen. Was he sure he wanted to use these? If he tried them and decided they weren't suitable, he could exchange them. He took the box and replied that everything was fine and he thought he would find it useful. At that moment, Changsu turned to Lohan and asked if he could hold on to this for a while. He replied that such a service cost 2 apples and accepted the box. The girl continued to explain that they now needed to cast a 7-year blessing to tame the water spirit. They could offer a blessing with good compatibility, but then he would have to use their blessing as food each time, and using his own was more likely to result in mission failure. What would they do then? He asked about the abundance blessing. The girl replied that there were no separate records, and that she apologized to him. He replied that nothing serious had happened and that he would use his own. She gestured toward the door and told him to come through here. This corridor connected to the dungeon, and they would explain everything to him there. When he saw the portal through the door, he looked closely at it, and Lohan tensed and lowered his gaze. Entering, the girl announced that he was finally here, All preparations were complete. He greeted her, and she informed him that this was the hunting ground for common water spirits. If he lit the blessing, they would escape, and he could catch as many as he wanted. But according to the contract, the boss must be destroyed. The byproducts go to alchemy, and the boss himself is in a separate area. Could he please bless the potion first? Changsu said yes, and used the abundance blessing skill. He understood without a doubt that the more, the better. So now they'll see who wins? At that moment, the liquid began to swirl wildly in the vessel, and he asked if that was normal. The liquid suddenly turned green, and the girl replied that sometimes this happens when too many blessings are applied. That was generous. Changsu smiled and said, okay, then they'll continue. She replied that, generally speaking, a large number of blessings doesn't make the spirit particularly strong. At that moment, he added 500,000 points, and the liquid began to literally glow in the jug. He asked if it looked beautiful, so everything was fine. The girl, surprised, replied that, frankly, she'd never seen anything like that before. This became interesting, and she decided to bring someone right away. The protagonist said that they were like on some kind of training exercise. At that moment, she brought over a strange creature she was holding in her hands and screamed. Now, he realized that it had happened incredibly quickly, and she had dropped this huge drop into the potion. The protagonist realized this is it, a water spirit. At that moment, the water spirit fell into the potion, and splashes of green flew everywhere. Changsu wondered if it had really worked. Slime dripped off the water spirit, and moments later, the creature uttered unpleasant sounds. Changsu realized the compatibility was disgusting and didn't know what to do. He clutched his head, wondering what to do next. But before he could finish his sentence, a multitude of other water spirits appeared from the door and approached him. The girl's mouth dropped open in shock, and she began screaming, "What's going on?" The bait hadn't even been used yet. This urgently needs to be written down. She took out a notebook and pen and began writing. Changsu was absorbed by these water spirits and didn't know what to do. Now was not the time to take notes, in his opinion. When he stood up, he extended a finger into the distance and asked everyone to look. The main water spirit was being absorbed. The girl replied that she was watching without blinking, observing this. Changsu was surprised by her reaction and shouted to do something. She replied that she had never seen anything like this before. Had he, by any chance, taken any strange potions? He replied that he hadn't taken anything, but the girl frowned and continued to stare at him silently. He confirmed that he hadn't taken anything, and she asked again. Perhaps he had overdone something. It seemed that this generously applied blessing was acting as bait. Changsu asked why he felt sick. The girl thought he must have just overeaten. Fortunately, these were the last water spirits. When they turned around, the girl exclaimed that this couldn't be happening. She dropped the tablet and pen and exclaimed, "Why the boss? The bait shouldn't work on the boss." Suddenly, they noticed a blue tail, and the protagonist realized it was the dungeon boss, the supreme water spirit. The water spirit appeared directly above them and began to spread throughout the room, causing Changsu and the employee from the building to stare up in shock. He screamed for it to stop, when suddenly the water spirit began to emit a bright glow. Numerous individual droplets appeared in the air, and from one of them, a huge drop formed in the shape of the water spirit. Changsu screamed that it had grown even larger, and the girl asked if it had even absorbed the boss. She fell to her knees, unsure what to do. The water spirit began to cry and make sad sounds. Changsu clutched his head, wondering why anyone would even entrust the dungeon clearing to some farmer. He didn't know what to do and watched the scene unfold while the water spirit screamed. Water continued to flow from his mouth. Lohan watched in bewilderment and continued chewing his apples. Changsu realized he was in a hopeless situation. He asked, "What's wrong?" It was his fault. Without thinking, he immediately thrust the potion at him. When he touched the drop of water with his hand, he asked, "Is it heavy?" "No matter. Let it empty its tummy, and it will feel better." He felt the energy surging and decided to try to regulate it with the blessing of abundance. Magical sparks began to emanate from his hand, and he looked confidently ahead, after which the water spirit began to shrink. Changsu guessed that it seemed to have shrunk significantly. Nothing terrible had happened. Then the spirit began to shake, and suddenly it poured a large amount of water into the face of the protagonist, who didn't have time to say that he was cute. Then the water spirit began to roll from side to side and suddenly jumped into the air and glowed. Changsu realized it had turned into a ball. The ball was in his hands, and the girl congratulated him on successfully taming the water spirit. Although he had failed the task by not capturing the supreme water spirit, he had violated the terms of the contract. He replied that this was exactly what he was expecting, and the girl pointed out that if anyone were to point out his mistake using that logic, he could point to two things. First, the potion given by the alchemists was the cause of the incident. Second, the rights to this water would work to his advantage. He'd accidentally stepped in the water and wondered, is this vomit? Of course it was transparent, but he still felt a bit uneasy. The girl added another condition. He mustn't forget to give a grade. A perfect score was required. Changsu asked if this was really just a training exercise. She explained that when the spirit regained its strength, it would awaken and he shouldn't worry about it. Its appearance might differ from before, so he shouldn't be too alarmed. Suddenly, a man burst into their office and shouted that Apostle Changsu, Lord of Abundance, was a definite failure. He'd received the reward and still failed. Surely he was aware of the penalty this incident was caused by the alchemists provided. Did he misuse it? The water spirit, as well as all weapons issued to him, are subject to confiscation. At that moment, Lohan drew his sword and, grabbing it, threw it with incredible force towards the man. He was terrified, and the sword hit the wall, shattering it into pieces. He began screaming loudly, and Lohan said it was unpleasant. He was saved by Unku, who arrived just in time and pushed the man aside. He asked if this was how he greeted an old friend he hadn't seen in a long time. Didn't he even want to say hello? These words were addressed to Lohan, who, without noticing, walked up to his sword and took it from the wall. Unku mentioned, by the way, that they needed the Ministry of Food here. It has nothing to do with this place. Did they really come out of a grudge against the display case and the cart? Then losing their apostle status isn't all. They'll also be issued a whole stack of lawsuits. Is that correct? He believes he's not that stupid. At that moment, the guy bowed and said nothing of the sort. Yunku said he'd then ask him to vacate the place, and the guy changed, ran out of the office. At that moment, Yunku approached Changsu and asked, "Is it him?" He was very pleased to meet him and gave his name. They had been so awkward from the start, but he suggested they settle the matter. He shouldn't be so tense. Yes, the cleanup had failed, but at least they now had this special water. It was enticing the boss, and this was no joke. The alchemists would be in high gear again, just like with the ostrich essence. He didn't need it anyway, so it was better to sell it to them. Changsu asked, stunned, what? They really were paying money for vomit. Yunku continued to say that if he sold it, they would consider the task complete, and if he refused, but before he could finish, Changsu said he would sell it. Yunku replied that this was an excellent solution, and then all that remained was to determine the price. What about potion processing equipment? Changsu was surprised and asked again. Equipment? Yunku replied that they had machines that could be used even without alchemy skill, and he could do much more than he currently could. Changsu remarked that this sounded tempting. But could he really brew potions? He was afraid of a conflict like with a wind cart. Yunku asked again if he wasn't underestimating alchemy. Even if so, he had nothing to lose. They always needed talented people like Changsu. After some time, their conversation continued. He asked, so Changsu wasn't Lohan's disciple? The protagonist answered that everything was correct and asked again, was he okay with Lohan? Yunku asked again, what was he even talking about? Changsu noted that it was because of him that Lohan attacked him. Unku replied that he sometimes deliberately did it to get tense. Everything was fine, and he didn't care at all. Changsu noticed he was apologizing non-stop again, and turned to Unku and asked if there was any way. He ate apples every day. He'd already tried everything to get him to eat something else. Lohan replied that he was actually an excellent cook, and Changsu got angry, so he should eat normally and varied. Yunku told him to give it up and accept it. It would be easier that way. His character was simply unbreakable. Just then, a car pulled up as they stepped outside, and the driver asked if he was Mr. Changsu. He'd come for him. He should get in the car. Changsu turned around in surprise at his name and asked again, was he waiting for him? But why? Lohan, meanwhile, couldn't understand why he was addressing him by name but so politely with Yunku. Changsu noted that they were already much closer. After that, Changsu was driven around the Golden City. He looked out the window. He never thought he'd be called to Chastity. Chastity is an important partner. They help them. They're certainly curious about Apostle Park Hanyul, so it makes sense. Although it's still daytime, everything was just as Heisujin had described. The car stopped, and MC saw the majestic Chastity Temple in front of him. The building stood out from the crowd. The man said he'd take him to the living room, and once they were inside, Changsu kept looking back. The man led them to a room where the elders were already waiting. One of them, an apostle, said they were glad to see them, and that he was sorry they'd called them so suddenly. The journey had been long. They must be tired. MC introduced himself to him, and he invited him to sit down and talk over a cup of tea. The man immediately inquired about the condition of Apostle Park Hanyul, and he lowered his gaze, deciding to tell them everything honestly, rather than give them false hope. He replied that everything was sad, with no improvement yet. The woman asked how the development of the medicine was progressing. He replied that the process was slow, but there was some progress. Then she asked what the chances of success were. He replied that they were doing their best, and then one of the elders loudly put a cup of tea on the table and said that they did not need to try. Changsu was perplexed by his words and asked them not to perfect the medicine. In fact, let them delay its production as long as possible. Confused, he said that he completely understood. Isn't Apostle Park Hanyul important to Chastity? The man asked him not to complicate things. If he was unsure of the result, maybe it would be better for him to switch sides. The apostle said that they would fulfill everything Park Hanyul had promised. They could even do twice as much. MC frowned suspiciously and wondered if there was a rift within them. This was bad. He apologized to them with an awkward smile, saying he could pretend he hadn't heard anything, and wondered if they were betraying their comrades and wanted him to trust them. After that, he headed for the exit and said that he wanted them to sort things out among themselves, but the elder stopped him excitedly and exclaimed that he had seen everything along the way. Day, night, always, it's dark here all year round. He thinks chastity can exist like this? Even apostles become depressed and end their lives. He said he didn't know all the details, but maybe this was the will of the god Chastity? The apostle nervously clenched his teeth and warned him that a simple farmer shouldn't interfere with the affairs of a deity, and the man said that they would revoke the certification. Changsu looked at him in shock and thought, is this the notorious power? And he is the elder of an entire faction? It was written all over their faces that they were up to something. Fine, he talked to them. He told them that if they kept changing their minds on the fly, they would undermine his trust and chastity. And then Lohan patted him on the shoulder and said they needed to leave. The catch was too obvious. He asked, confused, are they just going to leave? He confirmed it, and the man shouted that if they left, they would deeply regret it, and Lohan said it would be on their conscience. When they left, slamming the door loudly, the apostle cursed and asked, so did they understand everything? The man apologized to him, saying that apparently he hadn't played it convincingly, and he smiled and said that they couldn't cause any direct harm, so they chose a roundabout route. He had done well. The woman noted that this was the third attempt and another failure. What now? The apostle said that in that case there was no choice. They would have to move on to the fourth plan. Do they have any objections? They shouldn't worry. They only care about the result, which means the Apostle of Abundance needs a distraction. They will make him do something else so he doesn't have time to develop an endurance tonic. They will make him a hero. Meanwhile, Hongyul was carrying the goddess in his arms, and when she started fidgeting, he asked, should he let her go? As soon as her foot touched the ground, she ran off somewhere, and he noted that she had excellent intuition, just like a ghost. Although the answer is obvious, right? The goddess was running towards Changsu. She jumped on him, and when he fell to the ground, she started hitting him, and then the others ran up to him too. He thought that they seemed very worried, and Hongyul asked, were they finally back? He confirmed it and said that it was all thanks to the protection. But he had something to tell. Meanwhile, the goddess walked away, and the others began to scold her, saying that she was violating all propriety. MC meanwhile asked Hongyul if he knew that the chastity elders were planning a betrayal. He replied that they said they simply had different values, but they were not hostile to each other. When Changsu said that they asked him to give up on producing the stimulator, he was stunned. After that, the man looked away and apologized to him, promising that he would figure it out so that he would not be bothered anymore. Lohan said that there was no need for that, and MC said that he realized something while talking to Lohan. They were even willing to cancel the certification for the sake of delay. He thinks they are trying to slow down development. The man noted that this was quite logical, and Changsu said that it looked like they had some other moves, but he didn't know what. Hanyul told him not to worry. They treasured their own skins, so they wouldn't do anything truly dangerous. They'd rather apologize. He smiled wryly and asked, don't they have any pride at all? Hanyul asked, isn't this the perfect way to stall for him? He replied that he wasn't planning on going anyway, and even less so now. Hanyul asked, so what next? He answered him with a confident smile that he would continue working on the cure. This was the best revenge. Hanyul wanted to say something, but he saw a glow below Changsu and immediately became agitated. He rushed at him and exclaimed, did he receive the gift of chastity just by thinking about it? He exclaimed that that wasn't true at all, then took the water spirit pearl out of his pocket and said that it looked like it was waking up. The goddess stared at him in shock, wondering what he'd done this time. All eyes were focused on the pearl, the glow growing stronger with each passing second. And then the pearl fell from MC's hands and turned into a shapeless mass. Changsu stared at it in shock. It was an ordinary slime. The slime decided to try moving for the first time since birth and made a rather unsuccessful jump, and MC, watching it, thought that they had told it that it was a water spirit, but by the looks of it, it was an ordinary slime. He asked, are they all like this initially? Hanyul answered him that he had never even heard of spirits taking such a form, and then Changsu carefully extended a finger to the slime, and he touched him. MC jumped back in fear, surprised that it had hands, and thought that it was so soft. He touched it again and wondered if it could even understand speech. The slime waved at him, and he thought, does that mean it understood everything? Hangyul noted that, according to rumors, spirits are quite difficult to tame. He congratulated it on this. He was surprised, and Ari approached the slime and asked if it was new. Doji ordered him to bow to the goddess first, and Changsu turned to them, saying that they were just in time. It's a water spirit, by the way. They haven't given him a name yet. He thought about it, and Lohan suggested something. It's squishy, and short for water spirit. How about squishrit? MC smiled wryly and thought it was just awful. The others thought so too. He asked, what if we call it Spring? Hangyul noted that it was a good name. Does that have any special meaning? Changsu thought that it actually comes from the word sprinkler, but he wouldn't say that. He answered that spring is the time when plants bloom and fill with life. Wouldn't that be a suitable name for a water spirit? Everyone was happy. Only Lohan thought his option was better. After that, MC took the spirit in his arms and decided to see what it was capable of. He glanced at the others, noticing their exhaustion and noticing they had been in such a hurry that they hadn't even eaten. He put on an apron and turned to the apostle, asking if he was hungry too. He confirmed it was already evening, and he invited him to dine with them that day. He would cook something delicious. After that, Changsu started cooking, and while he was rolling out the dough, Hangyul became curious about what he was going to make, but he decided to keep the suspense. After that, he tossed an apple to Lohan, followed by the dough. He deftly caught the fruit, then pulled out his blade and swung it several times, cutting the dough into strips. MC took the dough and thanked him, and he said that next time he would only accept 2 apples. Hangyul was shocked by his skills, Was this how one could use swordsmanship? After this, Changsu threw the spaghetti into the frying pan, and after a while everything was ready. In the end, their table featured potato noodle pasta, potato pancakes, sweet potato au caramel, braised tofu, and apple pie, Lohan's specialty. As soon as Hangul tried a bite, he enthusiastically declared it delicious. Do they eat this every day? Now he regrets not eating with them earlier. MC smiled and asked him to slow down. There was a lot of food. On the other side of the table, the eating was quite uncivilized. Doji devoured everything at once. Ari pecked at his noodles so furiously that they scattered all over the table, and the goddess began to eat, looking rather unwell. Changsu glanced at Lohan eating the pie and thought it was a pity he hadn't tried other dishes, but it couldn't be helped. He extended his hand to Spring and offered him something to eat. He placed a couple of blessings on him, which he ate immediately. When he was about to start eating, Spring suddenly became capricious. He asked, "What's wrong? The blessings should have been enough. Does he really want ordinary food?" The spirit nodded, and when he offered him an apple to try, his eyes lit up with delight. He climbed onto the apple, which was almost his size, and then completely devoured it, his eyes sparkling. He was so happy with the taste that his body even took the shape of a heart, and MC said with a smile that there was plenty of food, so let him eat as much as he wanted. Spring was very happy. He turned into a star and began jumping. Time passed, and in the morning, Changsu went out for a walk and noticed that a road had appeared. Yunhyuk ran up to him and happily informed him that they had made the road to make it easier for him to walk and that their efficiency had also increased. He could see they were working hard. MC smiled awkwardly and thought that while he was pleased, they were being overly diligent for the prisoners. He thanked them, and Yunhyuk, noticing the creature in his hands, asked who it was. He replied that his name was Spring, a water spirit. He was surprised that he had already tamed a spirit, and the other prisoners crowded around him with interest. Yunhyuk immediately scolded them and told them to get to work, and Changsu said that everything was fine. They had already made a great road. They could take a little break and see Spring's abilities. He placed him on the ground, and he prepared himself. After that, air bubbles appeared in the puddle next to him, and MC thought that, as expected from a spirit, he could control water. After that, a large geyser appeared, and everyone praised his abilities, and he happily returned to his owner. It was time for another trick. He spun around, and the geyser did the same, which was making them worry, as the water was growing more and more with each passing second. Seeing the slime directing the water somewhere to the side, he called out to it with concern and said that it wasn't allowed there. Sky was there. But the cat wasn't that simple. It unsheathed its claws and swung its paw, cutting through the stream of water heading towards it, and then approached its owner with displeasure and glared at the offending slime. This scared him greatly, and MC immediately began to calm him down, saying that Sky is usually calm, but when he gets angry, it gets creepy. So next time, let him be more careful. He saw Sky looking at him menacingly, after which he took it and told everyone to disperse. Finally, there was peace and tranquility again. Sky was lying in the bushes sniffing mint, and MC wondered if the fire had been put out yet. He asked Spring to make him some water to drink, after which the system told him something about the current block ownership rights. But an error popped up, and he wondered if the system had broken down. He knew the system was unstable, but what did he even understand? Suddenly, Sky pounced on him, opened its mouth wide, and bit him with all its might, and the system reported that the block ownership rights had been lost, and that access to the block was blocked. Several more such messages appeared, after which Changsu picked Sky up and pushed it away from himself, and remembered how much he had cared for it all this time. Emotions overwhelmed him, and in a trembling voice, he said that he cared about it so much. How could it do this to him? How was this even possible? Sky, with an innocent look, only meowed in response. After that, the cat jumped out of his arms and headed towards the house, stretching, and MC nervously pursed his lips and mentally told himself to calm down. Sky is very smart, so it must have had a reason for doing this. He opened the system and thought that he had lost his ownership rights, but at least the system window anomaly had stopped. Hangul approached him, saying that he had been looking for him everywhere, and he asked with a gloomy look, "Where is Lohan?" He told him that he was training, and he worriedly asked if something had happened to him. He told him everything, and Hangul was so surprised that he even screamed, interrupting all his work. He asked, "He's talking about the possession rights parasite, right?" MC didn't understand what kind of parasite he meant, and he answered him that it was one of the 7 plagues, the same as Sky. He smiled awkwardly and asked if he could tell him more about it. He didn't know anything about it. He asked, was he training in seclusion? Let's say Block A is infected, and when someone buys the ownership rights to this block, they also become infected. If the infected then acquires the rights to another block, that block also becomes infected, and this process is repeated countless times until everything is destroyed. The parasite not only multiplies rapidly, but also has no visible form, so the infection is difficult to notice, and by the time you realize it, it's too late. Like in his case. He asked what happens to a block when it is taken over by the parasite. He was told that the block loses all functions, buffs and debuffs, and passages are blocked. Even the blocks he previously owned become infected, so he should be careful. He opened the system and thought he had 90 left. If the rest of the rights were still there, does that mean Sky only ate the infected ones? Of course, it wouldn't devour rights without a reason. He picked up his pets and asked Sky, "He's right, right?" After which, Changsu used abundance on a mint bush and thought that he had worked so hard to pave the way. All the blocks connected to the city disappeared. By the way, when he bought the rights near the city, there were other forces there too. He asked, if it's a parasite, then there must be some kind of insecticide? Hangul answered him, that's not true. It's still a disaster. And then he asked, how did they deal with it before? He thought about it and answered him that there are ways, but there is no reliable data on their actions. Perhaps movement between territories will be seriously limited. Suddenly, the hamster got alarmed and started hitting Changsu on the chest, and he told him that he was busy right now. But when he impersonated the goddess, he became very agitated and exclaimed, did something happen to her? Meanwhile, the goddess sat and looked bored, asking how the apostle was. Doji asked her not to worry so much, and Ari irritably called the apostle useless. He should focus on the goddess. They say they even got a cat in the neighboring block. When the apostle returns, they'll have to set him straight. The goddess was upset that she was replaced by a cat, and at that moment, a rift appeared above them. Ari looked up and was terrified. A voice came from the rift, saying that he smelled something delicious. As soon as the creature said this, Doji immediately perked up and started asking where the treats were, and Ari exclaimed irritably that he was the one talking about them. The goddess became nervous and began to threaten the monster, but it only laughed in response, and Ari confidently said that he would regret coming here, and Doji told him to stop trying to lure it with food. After that, they rushed to attack, and the goddess tried to stop them, saying that they were no match for it, but they were confident in their strength. They assumed their full forms and pounced on the enemy, saying that he was finished, and then struck the monster with blows, but their attacks were very weak. Ari unleashed a fiery tornado strike, unaware that his true form had evaporated, and then the monster struck back, causing an explosion that sent them flying. The goddess immediately ran to them, concerned for their health, then glanced at the monster and thought that nothing could be done. The points the apostle had worked so hard to earn needed to be spent, but Lohan arrived just in time to help. He immediately jumped up and pounced on the monster from above, then delivered a powerful blow that caused an explosion, sending a shockwave that engulfed everything around him. The goddess looked up at him in fear, and thought that it was thanks to the swordsman that they had survived. After this, he came up to her and bowed, which left her confused. He then took an apple from his pocket and placed it in front of them. Doji, smelling the delicious aroma, immediately regained consciousness and excitedly called out to him, saying that he needed to finish off the monster first. But seeing that there was no monster anymore, he was surprised. The goddess said that she was indebted to this swordsman. Since he was a friend of the apostle, it meant he was a good person. Meanwhile, MC was already rushing towards them. He called out to them worriedly and asked if they were okay. Did anything happen? Ari angrily flapped his wings and exclaimed, how could they be okay? Where had he even been? Seeing that he was cursing as usual and Doji was eating apples, he realized that they were okay. Lohan helped them. He bowed to him, thanking him for it, and he said that a parasite of ownership had appeared. It had started to interfere, and he cut it down. Changsu said that this block was lucky then, at least one problem was solved, but Lohan said that this was not true at all, and he asked in confusion, what did that mean? He destroyed it, didn't he? He answered him that this was only the beginning. The parasite will appear again. He literally cut off only a part, and in the crack, he saw countless insects and something else. Hangul said that it was probably the mother, just like an ant queen. Since they are incapable of self-reproduction, it seems that they are controlled by a separate entity. However, the question is why the parasites showed themselves. MC suggested that it was because there was a temple here. Since this was a special block, they were most likely going to swallow it whole. Unlike other places, there were no property rights issues here. Lohan asked what they would do next, and Changsu, looking at the four of them, declared that they had to protect them, and they would do it. Hangul said that he didn't want to kill his confident mood, but how was he going to protect them? He became slightly nervous as he thought about the answer, and then told him that if there was no cure for the parasites, he would do it himself. Hangul said that he meant how he was going to do it. He asked in response, have you forgotten? He's actually an apostle of abundance. He enhanced the special properties of crops, creating vitality tonics. He knows how to combine ingredients, so he's quite capable of creating a trial version. Besides, there are plants with antiparasitic properties on a Western blog. Hangul noted that it wouldn't be easy, and he said that he would ask Sujin to plant more trees. A few days later, they were wandering through the forest, and Hangul asked if they really needed to come all the way here. This block was already infested. MC told him that if something happened to the temple, it would be a serious problem. The infestation here had already been confirmed, making it a great place for experiments. They needed to act quickly while Lohan was covering for them. Hangul pointed to his backpack and asked, he brought the parasite remedy, right? He confirmed it and was about to take it out, but Hamdal jumped out of his backpack and ran to his shoulder, and he said that he told him not to stick his head out, it was dangerous. The hamster said something proudly, and he asked him to stay close to him. He was not joking when he said it was dangerous. He took out a box of pills and said that fortunately, the medicine was securely packaged. First, he needs to try to buy back the lost property rights. He opened the system and made the purchase. Currently, he has 10 property rights. Changsu said with relief that there were no significant abnormalities, and Hangyul said that the night sky and the temple were exceptions, but usually the absence of symptoms is the norm. MC asked, "They haven't moved to another block, right?" He told him that this can't be, and he poured 2 pills onto his hand and said that then he will just take the medicines. As soon as these pills were in his system, the system informed him that the purchase of the property rights to the block was complete. He was glad it worked. The system had malfunctioned, and he had lost his property rights. Hangyul noted that there was definitely a reaction, and he took some sticks out of his backpack, saying that he would quickly use some parasite remedy on the block. He stuck the sticks into the ground, took out a lighter, and Hangyul worriedly asked if he had lit it too hot. Who knew what could happen? He answered with a confident smile that if he was going to exterminate, he needed to do it thoroughly, after which he set fire to the sticks and began to observe. Even if they couldn't destroy them completely, the effect should still be there. Hangyul noticed the weapon on his belt and remarked that he hadn't seen this sword before. He showed it to him and explained that it was a transforming sword that he had received from the alchemists. It could also change the trajectory of its strike in real time. Although the sword's durability was low, he thought it suited him perfectly. He added in his mind that decapitation cuts off the neck anyway, and this form would be convenient for striking advancing enemies. Suddenly, a huge portal appeared behind him. Hangyul excitedly warned him about it, and he turned around, wondering if it had vanished into thin air. He expected something dangerous, but some kind of flea jumped out of the portal and landed awkwardly, followed by others. He looked at them in bewilderment and asked, "What are they? Did they originally look like this?" This creature was too harmless to cause a disaster. Hangyul said that he had never seen such a thing either, and as soon as Changsu was distracted for a second, a whole bunch of them crawled out of the portal, and he exclaimed in panic, "Why are there so many?" He became nervous and wondered where the head was. He couldn't see it even with the decapitation skill. Fleas began to surround them from all sides, swarming together, and Hangyul noticed something, immediately ordered Changsu to back off and cast magic. Right before their eyes, some of these fleas merged into one huge one and pounced on them. Then MC activated the decapitation skill, using the system to find a weak spot and then struck it. But that's not all. More fleas pounced on him from all sides. He turned and swung his sword, decapitating them all. Then he threw something towards Hangyul. He thought he'd figured it out back when he was hunting the immortal demon, but who would have thought it would go this far? What he threw was a hamster, and it landed right on his face. Changsu, with a grim expression, asked him to keep an eye on it, then prepared for a new wave of monsters and said that these creatures had grown heads. He continued swinging his sword, running from side to side, and Hangyul thought it was good that he was on their side. Soon all the fleas were dealt with. He sat down to rest and sighed with relief. Hangyul nervously praised him for his excellent work, and he glanced at the portal, saying that the rift was about to disappear, but the royal essence still hadn't appeared. It didn't seem to be entirely effective. Hangyul said that his medicine was working, but it didn't seem to be able to completely solve his problem. He killed the surviving flea with just a wave of his hand, and then sat down next to Changsu and said that, as expected, perfection was impossible to achieve. The man told him not to lose heart. Even just seeing them was an unprecedented event. He needed a little more confidence. Didn't he say he ordered new anti-parasitic plants? If they use them together, the result will surely be better. MC was so grateful to them for calming him down, after which he stood up and said that Sujin should already be here. She was probably detained. Sooner or later, parasites will appear in other blocks. Hangyul said that she will come soon. At that moment, Sujin's voice was heard from the side, but she did not come alone. She ran up to Changsu and waved her hand, apologizing for being late. Nothing terrible happened, right? Seeing the apostle, she happily greeted him too, and MC asked who came with her. This girl extended her hand to him and said that they finally met. She had already introduced herself to him, hadn't she? Her name is Edwin Parasol. He remembered she was an employee from Alchemy who managed the water dungeon. He introduced himself to her in return, and she said that she was glad to meet him again, and he asked what business she came here for. She wanted to say something, and Sujin said that they just met on the road. She herself didn't really know anything about it, and he asked suspiciously, what happened anyway? Edwin told him that she wanted to get a job here. He asked why she would transfer from alchemy to abundance. She told him that she wanted to study the new water spirit, and he thought that he knew that she was passionate about science, but to endure both danger and inconvenience for it. She understood what he was thinking and told him not to worry so much. She also had to deliver alchemical tools and reagents. He noted that it wasn't easy to get here. It must be a serious step for her. She said with delight that she didn't want to miss a single moment of the spirit's growth. To be honest, her soul was bursting to break away that very day. He noted that she had a high sense of responsibility and asked if, since she was interested in science, she wasn't going to give him any strange potions. Was she? She told him that she would absolutely not do that or dissect anything, only observe and study. The hamster became very scared from their conversation and crawled under Changsu's clothes, and he said that if everything was really so, he would let her stay here, but only if she took responsibility if anything happened. She excitedly thanked him and exclaimed that she would have enough shelter and food. He said that they would still need the results of her research, but she agreed to that too. He thought that she had shown up so opportunely and was even willing to work without pay. Could there be some hidden agenda behind this? But it seemed that for now, all he could do was hire her. Developing a cure for parasites was most important right now. He offered her this option. As soon as everything was finally decided, they would discuss the details again. After that, he turned to Sujin and asked what was going on with the ingredients he asked for. She told him she had brought everything and, taking a large bag out of her bag, said that it contained garlic, wormwood, and cloves. If taken internally, the effect would be quite noticeable. Hongyul, meanwhile, was thinking, is he going to fight a disaster? Can it even be considered a living being? Edwin asked what he was going to use all this for, to which he replied that he was planning to create a cure for the parasite of ownership. She was surprised and asked, isn't this one of the 7 plagues? He answered that it was exactly so. The research he wanted to ask her about was also related to this cure. That wouldn't be too difficult for her, would it? She immediately became interested and said that he could safely entrust this matter to her. Analysis and research are her specialty. While they were chatting, Sujin was trying to decide what to say. She called out to Changsu and told him that Chastity had sent an invitation, saying they wanted to apologize to him and promise to restore certification and continue purchasing. He asked if he could even enter the human territory now. Wasn't the passage blocked because of the parasite? She told him that with an invitation from Chastity, he would most likely be allowed through. He asked, what if he went back? She nervously told him that it would be difficult. They even sent a petition to Apostle Hainyul for her reinstatement. MC irritably noted that they were quite impudent, and everything looked so reasonable from the outside that made him even more disgusted. In any case, he was clearly trying to delay the development of potency products. Seeing her reaction, he wondered if this bothered her. He approached her and asked her not to make such a face. At least thanks to her, he stayed informed about what was happening. She thanked him with a smile for these words, after which she said that a rumor had spread that if you buy or eat anything from the human territory, you can become infected with the parasite. Hungil frowned and asked, was this also Chastity's doing? She told him that it was impossible to say for sure. There were these other forces that didn't benefit from a monopoly on the imperial apples. Edwin, meanwhile, didn't understand anything at all, and Sujin continued, saying that while the murmurs were still weak, she was afraid that discontent would only grow. Changsu said that then they should leave immediately. They would meet in the Western Bloc. Now it was time to exterminate the parasites. Time passed. Edwin had already begun her research and let out a loud cry of surprise, causing the skeleton to lose its head and start running after her throughout the forest. She examined the water spirit and said that she had never seen such a form, a water spirit in slime form, but initially it was supposed to be humanoid. He told her his name was Spring and asked if there were any special advantages to being a slime. She adjusted her glasses and told him that it was obvious. Cute. She answered him with such a serious face that he felt a little uneasy, after which he turned to Spring and said that this person wanted to observe him. He doesn't mind, right? He nodded slightly, and the girl was happy, asking, he gave her permission, right? But first, MC offered to discuss the terms of employment, and she said that she really only agreed to room and board, but he insisted on the minimum wage. Every day she will receive 1 imperial apple. One is worth 200,000 gold, and he thinks that will be more than enough. And also, entry to the temple is prohibited. She will live and eat here. She looked back at the skeletons and exclaimed excitedly, right here? She hid behind Sujin and exclaimed in fear that there were only skeletons here. The girl kicked her, throwing her away from herself, and the skeletons meanwhile even felt somehow uncomfortable because her words were praise for them. Yunyuk immediately dismissed them, and Edwin thought it was unthinkable to live side by side with injustice. She turned to Changsu and asked him to reconsider, as she would have nightmares every night. He replied that their paths were different, but they were all also in Abundance's service, and if they were afraid of harming her, there was no need. They were paid, and if you got to know them better, they were much nicer than they seemed at first glance. She sighed heavily, saying that she apparently had no choice, and a cat approached her. She was overjoyed to see another cute animal, but this cat was not so simple. Seeing her pet it, they fearfully asked her to wait, and she calmly asked if something was wrong. MC answered that it was because Sky was the apex predator of this territory. She immediately recoiled from the cat and exclaimed in fear, so this is one of the 7 disasters? Why is it even here? He awkwardly looked away, saying that it was quite difficult for him to explain, but if you don't bother with it first, it usually doesn't attack. Edwin thought in shock. Where had she ended up? A place where 2 of the 7 disasters are at once. What kind of office is this anyway? She looked at Sky, who was licking his paw, and began to beg for help. 2 weeks later, Changsu, as usual, was dealing with these parasitic fleas with the help of his fancy sword, which even allowed him to use it as a spring to jump high into the sky. And as always, his faithful friend Hamdal was with him. When they were in the air, he told him to hold on tight, and then he flew straight at this pile of fleas and swung his blade, decapitating them all at once. Time passed, and he finally killed them all, and could sigh with relief. Today, the number of reclaimed possessions reached 100. The anti-parasitic substance he created with Edwin doesn't allow you to lose ownership, so it can be considered for the infected. Now all he has to do is refine the substance for the blocks. But at that moment, another rift appeared behind him, and he became agitated. Several huge paws emerged from the rift, and he grinned nervously, telling the creature that they had finally met. Right in front of him was the royal specimen.